He had fallen asleep at the kitchen table for just 4 hours. When he woke up, he saw that the tiny people in the box had managed to build a temple and were praying to him. While he slept, thousands of years had passed for them, and now every decision he made determined the fate of millions. And yet, just a day ago, Ethan Clark was nothing but a bankrupt. 24 years old, kicked out of college 3 months ago. His girlfriend left 2 months ago. The debt collectors sent their third letter last week. His grandmother had died, leaving him only a run-down house in the Willowbrook suburbs. No job, no money, no plan. Just a key that sticks on the third try. Ethan had been studying the history of everyday life, how ordinary people in the Middle Ages survived plague quarantines, what they ate, how they treated their illnesses. The committee called the topic a non-starter and asked him to clear his desk by Friday. Now he's sorting through his grandmother's things: Sanskrit dictionaries, a hand-drawn map of the starry sky, strange instruments with symbols instead of numbers, and photographs of people he's never seen. On the back of one, a single word in pencil: garden. On the second day, he sets to work on the garden. He digs the soil around the old apple tree, and the shovel strikes something hard. Not a stone. A wooden box lies beneath the roots. Dark wood, smooth as if polished. Symbols he doesn't recognize from any language run across the lid, and he knows quite a few. And the box is warm. Not from the sun, from the inside. Ethan carries it to the kitchen. He sets it down next to a sandwich. And an unopened letter from the debt collectors. He stares at it for a minute. He opens it. Light hits him in the face. Soft, blue, like dawn reflected in water. Ethan recoils and nearly knocks over a chair. Inside, a ball the size of a walnut hovers. It glows and rotates slowly. Beneath it, a landscape. Mountains the size of a centimeter. An ocean the size of a saucer. Rivers thinner than a hair. And dots. Tiny clusters of dots near the mountains and along the rivers. And then he hears a sound, as thin as a mosquito's squeak. Singing. Dozens of voices in unison. That's how they sing when they're waiting for their father to return from war. That's how they sing when they believe they haven't been abandoned. Ethan leans forward. His breath must sound like a hurricane to them, and he whispers, "Hi, I'll try not to screw this up." The singing stops. 3 seconds of silence, and the dots below all take off at once. They converge toward the center of the large settlement, like streams into a river. A new sound rises. Not singing, a scream. Thousands of voices scream at once. Not out of fear, out of joy. Ethan slides to the floor and covers his face with his hands. He sits there for 5 minutes. He stands up. He looks down and freezes. In the center of the settlement, a tower has risen that wasn't there before. In 5 minutes. He grabs his grandmother's magnifying glass with the bone handle and stares intently. His breath catches in his throat. They are people. 2 or 3 millimeters tall. They are carrying a log. They sit by huts. They run along roads. They have houses with roofs and doors. They have children. An entire civilization lives right on his kitchen table. Ethan steps out onto the porch. A neighbor is mowing the lawn. A dog is barking somewhere. The world is perfectly ordinary. But inside the house, centuries are passing. He counts the hours and grows cold. Every minute of his time equals 100 of theirs. If he leaves the house for 8 hours, 48,000 years will pass for them. The birth and demise of civilizations, all in the time it takes him to run to the store. And this is where the worst part begins. He can't sleep. He can't leave. He can't live a normal life. Because every breath he takes costs them generations. That very night, he watches as the city doubles in size. Roads stretch toward the ocean. Someone is digging a canal from the river. Ethan watches, and at some point realizes he's crying. The story of everyday life he'd been searching for his whole life. Here it is, alive, right in front of him. He falls asleep at the table at 4 a.m, his face 10 centimeters from the box, and wakes up to a beam of light in his eyes. 8 a.m. The world has changed. The city is 5 times bigger. Fields stretch all the way to the ocean. The forest on the hillside has been cut down, and where the first tower once stood, there is now a temple with columns. In front of him is a square. In the square, a crowd with their hands raised. They are praying to him, to the God who fell asleep with a sandwich. Ethan leans back in his chair and utters one word. Damn. Then a second. Responsibility. He brews coffee, opens his laptop, and starts Googling. Life expectancy in the Bronze Age. What diseases kill agrarian civilizations? How to explain in simple terms why you should boil water. He reads for 4 hours, takes notes, he draws diagrams, and millennia pass inside the box. The letter from the debt collectors remains unopened. It can wait. Ethan leans toward the box and begins to speak. Ethan spoke slowly, each word separately. He didn't know if they heard his voice like thunder, or like the wind, or like music. But he saw through the magnifying glass that when he spoke, the dots below froze. All at once, like a field of wheat when the wind dies down. He said, I am here. I see you. I will not leave. He looked back through the magnifying glass at the laptop. He found an article about the first grain silos in human history. He returned to the box. He said, gather the grain after the harvest. Build stone structures. Dry ones, raised above the ground. That way the grain won't rot, and you'll survive the winter. Then he waited 10 minutes. Through the magnifying glass, he saw them begin clearing a site on the outskirts of the city. A foundation. They had begun building a granary. 1,000 of their years passed in his 10, and they built. Ethan felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. It was working. He tried again. He said, clay can be fired in a fire. It will become hard. You can make watertight pottery out of it. He waited. He watched. 20 minutes later, on the riverbank, he saw through the magnifying glass something resembling workshops. Smoke rose from tiny dots. Kilns. They had built kilns for firing. Ethan laughed. Then he laughed louder. Then he fell silent because he realized that his laughter must sound like a clap of thunder to them. He became more cautious. He spoke more quietly. He moved more slowly when he approached the table. He even breathed to the side, because his exhalation could be a storm to them. On the third day, what he feared happened. Ethan woke up in the morning and immediately went to the box. Something was wrong. The settlements on the eastern shore of the ocean were emptying. Through the magnifying glass, he saw the dots moving chaotically. They weren't building. They weren't working. They were darting about. And then they froze, one after another. The dots stopped moving. Ethan went cold. They were dying. He grabbed the magnifying glass and focused on the nearest city. The streets were littered with something. Bodies. Tiny bodies lay along the roads. People were carrying the dead out of their homes. A plague. An epidemic. Ethan rushed to his laptop. His hands were shaking. He opened his browser and searched for the history of epidemics in ancient civilizations. He read, he scrolled, he thought. What diseases kill quickly and on a massive scale in pre-industrial societies? Cholera, typhus, dysentery. All three are linked to water, to dirty water. Ethan remembered. John Snow, London, 1854, a cholera outbreak on Broad Street. Snow wasn't a microbiologist. He simply plotted all the cases on a map and saw that they clustered around a single water fountain. He closed the stand. The epidemic stopped. Ethan returned to the box. He leaned so close that his nose almost touched the edge. And he spoke. Slowly. Clearly. Find the well from which the sick drink. One well. A shared one. Seal it off. Fill it with stones. Boil the water before drinking. Keep it on the fire until bubbles form. Do not drink raw water. Wash your hands. Mix ash with fat and rub your hands with this mixture. It kills what's making you sick. He repeated it 3 times, then once more. Then he sat down in a chair and watched. 10 minutes. 1,000 years. 20 minutes. 2,000 years. During those 20 minutes, Ethan watched through the magnifying glass as the world below changed. The well in the center of the eastern city was surrounded by a wall. Then it was filled in. Then a building rose in its place. New wells appeared in other places. Next to them stood structures resembling kitchens, boilers. They were building water boilers. The epidemic was receding. The dots stopped freezing. Movement returned. Life returned. Ethan exhaled and realized he had been holding his breath for the last 5 minutes. He fell into a deep sleep. 6 hours. He woke up in the middle of the night. His first thought was of the box. 6 hours of sleep is 36,000 years of their time. He jumped up and ran to the table. The box glowed blue, as always, but something had changed. There was something on the outside of the lid. Ethan turned on the desk lamp and leaned in. On the wood of the lid, laid out in tiny droplets of something shiny, was a pattern, a symbol. He didn't know what it meant in their language, but the shape was recognizable. Hands, folded together, palm to palm. Gratitude. They had written "thank you" to him on the lid of his own box, with dewdrops or something else, for the night, for their 36,000 years. Ethan ran his finger along the edge of the pattern without touching it. Then he looked inside. The world was different. The eastern city had turned into a metropolis. Roads stretched in every direction. The fields were laid out geometrically. Aqueducts. He saw aqueducts, lines of canals from the rivers to the cities. And in the center of the old city, on the site of that first collapsed well, stood a temple. Large by their standards, with a square around it, and something was lying in the square. Ethan brought the magnifying glass closer. An object. Tiny, shiny. It lay on a pedestal in front of the temple, like an offering. Ethan couldn't make out exactly what it was. He rummaged through his grandmother's closet and found an old microscope. He adjusted it. He focused it. A silver drop, the size of a grain of rice, perfectly round. It lay on a miniature pedestal decorated with carvings. Figures had gathered around it. They were kneeling. Ethan carefully lifted the drop from the pedestal with 2 fingers. It was cold and heavy for its size. He turned it over in his fingers, placed it in his palm. Just a silver drop. Then he thought. He stood up, filled the glass with water from the tap, dropped the drop into the glass. The drop touched the water and glowed for a moment. The water became clearer. Ethan sniffed. The water smelled like a mountain stream, pure. Absolutely pure. He could feel it. He couldn't explain how, but he could feel it. The drop was purifying the water. They had given him a gift. The people he had saved from the plague had worked on this drop for generations, perhaps for centuries. The finest craftsmen, the finest minds, and the result lay in the palm of his hand. Ethan sat down on the kitchen floor, the silver drop in his right hand, a glass of clear water in his left, and he wept, not out of grief, but because, for the first time in 6 months, his life had meaning. The next morning, he began keeping records. He started a notebook, divided it into columns. Real-time date, approximate time inside the box, observations, what he said, what he saw in response. The first entry read, Day 3, real time, 72 hours. Internal time, approximately 430,000 years. The people survived their first major epidemic. Level of development corresponds to the early Bronze Age. Grain storage facilities appeared, pottery, aqueducts, temple architecture. The first gift, the silver drop, purifies water on contact, works in my world. Below, he added, they hear me, they understand me, they trust me. Don't let them down, Ethan. The following days merged into a routine. Ethan woke up. He checked the box. He recorded the changes. He leaned over and spoke. He pondered every piece of advice for hours, because every word he spoke became law for them for millennia. He told them about the 3-field crop rotation. You sow one field. You sow the second with a different crop. The third rests. Switch them up after a year. The soil won't get depleted. 20 minutes later, he saw the result. The fields were laid out differently. The yield seemed to double. Cities grew. He told them about the wheel. He didn't invent it, he just described it. A round stone or piece of wood, an axle in the center. It rolls along the ground. You can transport heavy things. Through a magnifying glass, I saw how the first carts appeared on the roads within 15 minutes of his time, over the course of their 1,500 years. He told them about numbers. He said, come up with symbols for quantity. 1 symbol is 1. 2 symbols are 2. 10 symbols are enough to count everything you need. An hour later, they had math, his numbers. He felt like a crazy teacher dictating lessons to a class of billions of students, each of whom lives and dies faster than Ethan can blink. On the 5th day, he decided to conduct an experiment. He took a pocket English-Russian dictionary, a small one, a paper one, his grandmother's. He carefully placed it in the box next to the mountain range. The dictionary lay there like a continent, huge to them. To Ethan, just an ordinary book. He went to sleep. In the morning, the dictionary was still there, but structures had grown up around it. Through the microscope, Ethan saw that they had built walls around the book. Stairs led up to the pages. Tiny figures crawled over the letters like climbers on rocks. They were studying the dictionary. Every letter, every word. To them, it was a sacred relic. A book the size of their mountain, left by God. Ethan left the dictionary for 3 days. In 3 days, 4,320,000 of their years passed. When he finally checked through the microscope, he couldn't believe his eyes. They had a writing system. Based on the Latin alphabet, but altered, adapted, their own. Grown from his dictionary like a tree from a seed. They wrote on the walls of houses, in the squares, on road signs. Through the microscope, Ethan made out an inscription above the temple entrance. He couldn't read it all, but he recognized one word. Altered, mangled, but recognizable. Creator. At the end of the first week, Ethan lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The box sat on the nightstand nearby. He couldn't leave it in the kitchen, couldn't let it out of his sight. In 1 week of real time, approximately 10 million years had passed inside. The people of Lorin, as he had named them in his notebook, had traveled the journey from stone huts to cities with aqueducts and writing. He gave them the fire of knowledge. They gave him meaning. Ethan rolled onto his side. He looked at the box. A blue light flickered like a nightlight. Soft singing drifted from within. They sang every night. For him, he whispered, "Good night." And for the first time in 6 months, he fell asleep without nightmares. On the 9th day in the real world, Ethan ran out of money for food. He stood in front of the open refrigerator and looked at the remnants of oil and half a jar of mustard. A box lay on the table. Inside the box, the people of Lorin were building the third generation of cities. They already had theaters and courts and schools and guilds of artisans, and their god couldn't afford a pack of pasta. Ethan closed the fridge. He put on his jacket. He picked up the box. He paused. He couldn't take the box to the store. He couldn't leave it at home. Every minute without him was 100 of their years. If he went out for an hour to get groceries, 6,000 years would pass. Generations would be born and die while he stood in line at the register. He set the box on the table. He leaned down. He said quietly, "I'm going out for a little while. I'll be back. Don't be afraid." And he left the house with the feeling that he was abandoning his children. The store was a 15-minute walk away. Ethan practically ran. He bought rice, pasta, canned beans, bread, milk. At the checkout, a man with a full cart was standing in front of him. Ethan shifted from foot to foot and counted in his head. 5 minutes of waiting is 500 years. 500 years, while he stands behind a guy with 20 cans of beer. He returned home 43 minutes later. He dropped the bags on the floor and rushed to the box. He opened it. He looked. 4,300 years. That's how much time had passed since he went to the store. The city had changed. Not drastically, but noticeably. New buildings had appeared, walls around some settlements, fortifications. So there had been conflicts, wars. While he was choosing between white and brown rice, they were fighting each other. Ethan sat down at the table and thought for a long time. He couldn't be with them every second. It's impossible. He needs to eat, sleep, bathe, go to the bathroom, live. Every time he turned away, millennia passed. Civilizations rose and fell. Civilizations flourished and collapsed without him. He realized he needed a system, a schedule, a check-in and a briefing in the morning, his real-world business in the afternoon, a check-in and a briefing in the evening, sleep and a prayer at night that they would hold on. But even with a schedule, every time he slept was an ice age for them. On the 10th day, Ethan went to a local cafe. He needed the internet. His grandmother's home router had died about 5 years ago. He sat down at a table by the window. He ordered the cheapest coffee. He opened his laptop and began reading everything he could find about how civilizations self-organize in the absence of leadership. Institutions, laws, traditions. What helps a society not fall apart when a leader disappears? He read about jury trials and how they reduce blood feuds, about mutual aid insurance funds, about elected elders, about the separation of powers. He needed to teach them to live without him, because he couldn't be there for them every single second. They had to be able to on their own. A waitress approached and asked if he wanted anything else. Ethan looked at her. A young woman, Asian features, short bangs, a notepad in her apron pocket. Her name tag read Sora. Ethan said, "No thank you," and went back to his laptop. He didn't notice that Sora had caught a glimpse of his screen. An article was open there about governance methods in the ancient Sumerian city-states. Ethan spent 4 hours in the cafe. He practically ran home. 24,000 years had passed while he was drinking his coffee and reading. The people of Lorin had been transformed. Through the microscope, Ethan saw that the borders of the states had changed. Instead of one large city, there were now 5, each with its own architecture, its own style. They had developed differently. Some built upward, others expanded outward. One city was by the sea and had a port with tiny ships. Ethan felt pride and anxiety at the same time. They were growing without him. That was good, but they might be growing in the wrong direction. He leaned toward the box. He said, "When there is a dispute among you, do not settle it by force. Gather 12 people who are not involved in the dispute. Let them hear both sides. Let them decide. This is fairer than a sword." He didn't know if they would listen, didn't know if they'd understand, didn't know if they'd listen. But he said it. On the 11th day, someone knocked on the door. Ethan flinched. No one ever came to see him. He put the box in the cabinet under the sink and covered it with a towel. He opened the door. A woman was standing on the porch. Tall, short haircut, a scar on her left eyebrow, broad shoulders. She was holding a pot covered with a lid. She said she was the neighbor across the street, Megan Reyes. She'd seen that he'd moved in. She brought soup. That's what they do here. Ethan took the pot. He thanked her. He tried to close the door. Megan looked at him closely and asked if he was all right. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Ethan said everything was fine. He was just sorting through his grandmother's things. Megan nodded, but she didn't leave right away. She looked at the house, at the overgrown garden, at the windows with the curtains drawn. She said that if he needed help with anything, she was just across the street, and she left. Ethan closed the door. He ate the soup. The soup was excellent, thick with beef and vegetables. His first hot meal in 3 days. He went back to the box. He took it out of the closet, set it on the table, and froze. There was a message on the lid again, but not dewdrops like last time. Carvings. Tiny hands had carved an entire picture into the wood of the lid. Microscopic. Ethan brought the microscope to his eyes. His jaw dropped. It was a map of their world. All 5 cities, the roads between them, mountains, rivers, the ocean, and in the center of the map, a symbol he recognized. An eye. His eye. They had seen him looking at them through the magnifying glass and the microscope, and they had carved his eye into the center of their world, like the sun. Ethan stepped away from the microscope and sat motionless for a long time. Then he stood up. He walked over to the mirror in the bathroom. He looked at himself. Stubble, dark circles under his eyes, a crumpled t-shirt, a man who forgets to eat and can't remember the last time he did laundry. God, he had to get himself together, not for himself, for them. On the 12th day, Ethan figured out how to leave them messages that would last through the millennia of his absence. He wrote a set of rules on a small piece of paper in simple words. Boil water. Wash your hands. Change the fields every year. Settle disputes together, not with a sword. Teach the children. Write down what you know. Don't forget. He rolled the piece of paper into a tube and placed it in a box next to the mountain. He went to sleep. In the morning, the paper was still there, but they had built another temple around it, bigger than the first. Through a microscope, Ethan saw that they had unfolded his note and affixed it to the stone walls. The letters were as big as a house to them. They had traced each letter with paint and decorated with ornamentation. His simple rules had become their sacred scripture. Ethan thought it was both funny and scary. He had written, "Thou shalt not kill," and "Thou shalt not steal," simply because it seemed right, and they had built a religion around it. He needed to be more careful with his words. On the 13th day, something new happened. Ethan was sitting in a cafe, reading again. This time about Bronze Age metallurgy, how they mined copper, how they smelted tin, what temperatures were needed. He wanted to show the people of Lorin how to transition from stone tools to bronze ones. The waitress, Sora, approached and set down a coffee he hadn't ordered. Ethan looked up. Sora was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and caution. She said she'd noticed he came in every day and read about the same things: ancient civilizations, technologies of the past, survival techniques. She asked if he was a historian or a survivalist. Ethan replied that he was a historian, a former one. Sora sat down across from him without being invited. She said she was one too. Well, almost. She was studying anthropology, an exchange student from Seoul. She was working part-time here until the semester ended. Ethan looked at her more closely. A notebook was sticking out of his apron pocket, worn, covered in small handwriting. Sora noticed his gaze and said she writes down everything interesting, a habit. Ethan asked what interesting things she'd written down here. Sora replied that, for example, him, a 24-year-old man. He comes every day, reads about the Sumerians and medieval medicine. Sometimes he whispers something into his phone, but the phone isn't to his ear, it's in his hand, screen down. Yesterday, she saw him whispering not into his phone, but into a small wooden box. Ethan froze. His hands clenched the coffee cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sora quickly added that she wasn't crazy and wasn't stalking him, just observant, an anthropologist's professional habit. Ethan finished his coffee, left the money on the table, said thanks for the coffee, got up and left, quickly, without looking back. His heart was pounding. She'd seen the box. She'd heard him talking to it. Idiot. He'd started bringing the box to the cafe because he couldn't leave it at home. He hid it in his backpack on his lap. He'd lean toward the backpack and whisper advice. He thought no one noticed him. He was wrong. Ethan returned home and closed all the curtains. He sat down at the table. He looked at the box. He thought. He couldn't go out with it. He couldn't leave it behind. He couldn't tell anyone. He couldn't. He was alone in this, all alone. The silver drop lay on the shelf next to the salt shaker. The box glowed blue. Billions lived inside it, and he couldn't tell a single living soul about it. 2 weeks, 14 days of real time. For the people of Lorin, about 20 million years had passed. Ethan no longer kept track. Numbers had lost their meaning. He saw through the microscope that their world had become unrecognizable. 5 cities had turned into 12. No, 20. The roads between them were straight and wide. Bridges spanned the rivers. Shipyards stood on the coast, and ships sailed out into the ocean. Colonies appeared on the far shore where there had been nothing before. The people of Lorin were spreading across their world just as humanity had spread across Earth, only 1,000,000 times faster. Ethan kept a diary, a new page every day. He was already on his 3rd notebook. He wrote everything down, what advice he gave, what he saw in response, what changes, what problems. And there were problems. On the 15th day, he saw smoke rising over one of the cities through a microscope. Not smoke from forges, black smoke, thick. The city was burning. War. The 2 largest cities in the state had attacked the 3rd. Ethan saw how armies moved along the roads, how siege engines the size of a grain of sand were rolled up to the walls, how the city was burning. He leaned toward the box and opened his mouth to say, "Stop!" and closed it, sat back down, watched for a long time. He remembered what he had read about the gods in mythology, gods who commanded, gods who punished, gods who forbade. They all created the same thing: slaves. Peoples who couldn't solve problems on their own. Peoples who waited for instructions from above. Will-less, dependent. He wouldn't be like that. He wouldn't say, "Stop the war." He would say something else. Ethan leaned toward the box. He said slowly, After the war, the victor can kill the vanquished, or let them live. If he kills them, he loses those who could build and grow and invent. If he lets them live, he gains an ally. The choice is yours. I will not choose. He stepped back. He wrote in his journal, Day 15, the first major war. Did not intervene directly. Established the principle of mercy toward the vanquished. The outcome is unknown. Waited 6 hours. 36,000 of their years. I checked. The city had been rebuilt, not razed to the ground. Rebuilt, with new walls, with new buildings. And next to it stood another city. A new one, where the besiegers' camp had once been. 2 former enemies stood side by side. A wide road between them. A trade route. They listened. Not everyone, not right away. But after millennia, they listened. Ethan rested his head on the table and laughed with relief. On the 16th day, Clara Mayfield arrived. Ethan wasn't expecting guests and opened the door with a magnifying glass in his hand. Clara was standing on the porch. Of average height, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, warm hazel eyes, a paper bag in her hands. She said she was from the pharmacy 3 blocks away. She'd noticed he'd been buying strange things from her. Activated charcoal, potassium permanganate, sulfur, a book on medicinal plants. And he asked if he could buy a small bag of pure clay. Clara said that usually such purchases are made either by amateur chemists or by people who are brewing up something unsavory. But he didn't look like the latter. More like the former. She brought the clay. Ethan looked at the bag. He looked at Clara. He said thank you. He was about to close the door. Clara said there was something else. Last night, she had walked past his house and seen a strange blue light through the window. Like a nightlight, only brighter. It was flickering. She asked what it was. Ethan replied that it was a lamp. An old lamp that belonged to his grandmother. It was malfunctioning. Clara looked at him. He looked at her. She didn't believe him. He knew she didn't believe him. She knew he knew. Clara said, okay. If he needed help with anything, the pharmacy was open until 7. She left. Ethan closed the door and exhaled. 2 women had taken notice of him in a week. Sora at the cafe, Clara from the pharmacy. Small town. Everyone notices everything. He had to be more careful. That evening, he decided to sort out his finances. He was running out of money. Grandma's house was paid for, but he needed to eat. He needed internet. He needed electricity. He applied for a position as a junior teacher at the local school. History. Part-time. Not much, but enough for rice and pasta. 3 days later, they called him back. The school principal, Mr. Finley, said that their history teacher had just quit and that Ethan could start on Monday, 20 hours a week, 4 hours a day, 24,000 years for the people of Lorin every single workday. Ethan agreed and hung up the phone with a heavy heart. 24,000 years, every day. While he tells the students about the Roman Empire, his own empire will live and die without him. Before his first day of work, he spent the whole night by the box. He didn't sleep. He talked. He told it all. About medicine, about construction, about navigating by the stars, about paper and how to make it from plants, about the printing press, about gunpowder and why it's better to use it for mining than for war. He spoke for 8 hours straight. His voice gave out. His throat ached. But he kept going because every word he spoke was a seed that would sprout over the millennia while he was gone. Toward morning, he fell silent. He leaned toward the box one last time before falling asleep. He whispered, I'm going to work tomorrow. I'll be back in the evening. That's a few thousand of your years. Don't be afraid. You'll manage. You're stronger than you think. He slept for 2 hours. He woke up. He got dressed. He went to school. All day long, he thought only of the box. He returned home at 5 in the evening. His backpack with his notebooks fell to the floor by the door. Ethan ran to the box. He opened it. He looked inside. And he sat down on a chair so abruptly it was as if he'd been punched in the stomach. They had reached a new level. In a single working day, the people of Lorin had made a leap equivalent to several Earth centuries. Ships were crossing the ocean. The cities on the far shore had grown into metropolises. Research stations had appeared at the North Pole of their world. Observatories. They were looking at the stars, upward, at him. But the main change was something else. Through the microscope, Ethan saw, in the center of the oldest city, a building that was enormous by their standards. Round, with a dome. A square surrounded it. Thousands of figures in the square, neat rows. They weren't praying. They were in session. It was an assembly hall, a parliament, a council. They had created an institution of collective decision-making, without his command, without his prompting. He had told them once that 12 people could resolve a dispute better than a single sword. They took that idea and, over thousands of years, turned it into a system of governance. Ethan looked at the tiny parliament and felt what a father must feel when his child stands on its own 2 feet for the first time. Pride, fear, and the realization that soon he would no longer be needed. A new gift lay on the lid of the box. Ethan picked it up with tweezers. It was a compass. Tiny, the size of a pea. Perfect. The needle moved, but it didn't point north. Ethan turned. The needle turned with him. He turned again. The needle turned again. It wasn't pointing north. It was pointing somewhere. Ethan walked in the direction the needle was pointing, through the kitchen, into the hallway, to the closet in the entryway. He opened the closet. The needle was pointing down, to the bottom shelf. There lay his grandmother's box of documents. Ethan took it out and opened it. Inside were papers, home insurance, tax documents, old receipts, and at the very bottom, an envelope, sealed. Written on the envelope in his grandmother's handwriting, "For Ethan, when he's ready." Ethan looked at the compass. The needle was pointing at the envelope, the second gift. A compass that doesn't show direction, but rather what you need most. Right now, what Ethan needed most was what was in that envelope. He wanted to open it. His hands were already tearing at the paper. He stopped. Grandma had written, "When you're ready." He didn't know yet if he was ready. He put the envelope back. He put the compass in his pocket. He went back to the box. He wrote in his journal, Day 19, the second gift. A compass points to what is most needed. Pointed to Grandma's letter. Didn't open it. Not yet. Ethan closed the notebook. He looked at his watch. Midnight. Work tomorrow. 24,000 years without him. He leaned toward the box and said quietly, "Good night. I believe in you." Singing rose from the depths, quiet, grateful. He turned off the light and lay down. The compass in the pocket of his pants, hanging on a chair, glowed softly in the dark. The needle turned. Now it pointed at the pillow, at Ethan. What he needed most was sleep. School turned out to be both a salvation and a torture. A salvation because Ethan needed money, structure, and a reason to leave the house. A torture because every minute of class he thought about the box. He stood in front of the class and told 12-year-olds about ancient Egypt while counting in his head. 45 minutes of class is 4,500 years. While he explains to the students what papyrus is, the people of Lorin could travel the path from the Middle Ages to the Industrial Revolution. Or they might not. They might start a world war. They might die of the plague. They might destroy themselves. And he stands there, drawing pyramids with chalk on the board. The children loved him. He wasn't like the other teachers. He told history as if it were a living person. Not dates and battles, people. Here's a peasant in 14th century England. Let's call him John. John wakes up at 4 in the morning. He has one shirt, and it hasn't been washed in a month. His wife cooks porridge from whatever they have. The children help in the field starting at age 6. What illnesses John suffered from, how he was treated, what he thought about God and death and taxes. The students listened with their mouths agape, because Ethan spoke as if he personally knew John. And in a sense, he did, because he saw similar people every evening through a microscope. Alive, real, 3 millimeters long. In the third week, Sora came to see him at the cafe again. He was sitting by the window with his laptop, as usual. She sat down without being invited. She placed a notebook on the table. She opened it to a page with notes. Ethan saw the heading, Subject A. Below were notes. Visits daily. Visit duration 1 to 3 hours. Reads monographs on the history of technology. Whispers into an object, presumably a box or container. Shows signs of anxiety. Checks the time every 2 to 5 minutes. Sora looked at him and said she wasn't a spy or a madwoman. She's an anthropologist. Observing people is her job. And he's the most interesting subject in this city. Ethan wanted to get up and leave, but Sora continued. She said she'd seen something else. 3 days ago, he'd dropped something small and shiny from his pocket. She'd picked it up. She'd thought about returning it, but then she'd examined it. Sora took the silver drop out of her apron pocket. She placed it on the table between them. Ethan's heart stopped. The drop lay on a napkin, tiny, innocent, the most important object in his life. Ethan slowly reached out and took the drop. He hid it in his fist. He looked at Sora. She looked at him without fear, with curiosity. She said she had tested it. She dropped the drop into a glass of tap water, which smelled of chlorine here. The water became clear, odorless, tasteless, like mountain water. Sora took out her notebook again and showed him the results. She had conducted a series of experiments. Dirty water, soapy water, water with food coloring. The drop purified everything, every time, 100% result. Sora closed her notebook. She looked at Ethan. She said she didn't know what it was, but she knew it wasn't just a piece of jewelry, and she knew that he knew what it was. Ethan was silent. 30 seconds. A minute and a half. He was thinking, fast. If she told anyone, if she went to the police, or to the university, or online, if she posted about it on social media, his life would be over. They'd take the box. The people of Lorin would perish. But Sora didn't tell anyone. She walked around with the drop in her pocket for 3 days, conducting experiments, and didn't tell a soul. An anthropologist, an observer. She wanted to understand before she spoke. Ethan finished his coffee. He looked out the window. He looked at Sora. And he said that if she wanted to see the most incredible thing anyone could ever see in their life, she should come to his place that evening, and that if she told even one person, he didn't know what he'd do, but she definitely wouldn't like it. Sora nodded. No fear, just a sparkle in her eyes. She arrived at 7. Ethan opened the door. Let her in. Closed the curtains. Checked the windows. Paranoid, he thought to himself. 2 weeks ago, he was just an unemployed historian, and now he's closing the curtains before a demonstration of an alien civilization. The box sat on the table. Blue light filled the kitchen. Sora saw the light and stopped in the doorway. Ethan said, "Come here." She walked over. She leaned over the box and stopped breathing. She stared at the tiny world for 4 minutes without moving. 4 minutes is 400 of their years. Then she lifted her head. Her eyes were shining. Her hands were shaking. She whispered, "What is it?" Ethan answered, "They're alive." Sora leaned over again. Ethan handed her a microscope. She looked through it. She saw cities, people, ships, temples, roads, fields. She saw two tiny people carrying something down the street, a child running after a cart, a woman standing in the doorway of a house looking up at her. Sora looked away from the microscope. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her life, and that her parents had told her her whole life that anthropology was useless, that studying people wasn't a real profession, that she was wasting her time. And here was an entire civilization, alive, real, growing right before her eyes. For the first time in her life, she cried with happiness. Ethan handed her a napkin. He sat down beside her. He told her everything, from the very beginning, how he found the box, how he heard the singing, how he saved them from the plague, how he received the silver drop, how he left the dictionary and they created a writing system, how he received the compass. He spoke for 2 hours. Sora listened. She took notes in her notebook. She asked questions, smart questions, not how he survived and not whether it was impossible, but what their social structure was like, whether they had art, how they buried their dead, whether they had music, how they raised their children. An anthropologist to the core. At 11 o'clock that night, Sora looked up from her notebook and said he had a problem. He was alone. He couldn't be a god on his own. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating properly. He was falling apart. Sooner or later, he would break, and then they would all perish. He needs help. Ethan replied that he knew, but he couldn't tell anyone. It was too dangerous. Sora looked at him and said it was too late. She knew, and she wasn't going anywhere. Ethan wanted to object, but he was tired. Tired of carrying this alone. Tired of counting every minute. Tired of waking up in a panic and running to the table to check if his people were still alive. He nodded. Sora stayed until 1 in the morning. They made a schedule. She would come every evening after her shift at the cafe. While he slept, she would watch the box and keep records. Not interfere. Just watch. Document. Record changes, so that when he woke up, he'd have a full report and not a blind spot spanning 40,000 years. The first night on watch with Sora, Ethan lay down in bed, the box on the kitchen table. Sora was at the table with a microscope and a notebook. He closed his eyes and thought that he was entrusting the most important thing in his life to a 23-year-old Korean woman he barely knew, and that he had no choice, because God goes mad when he's alone. He woke up at 6 in the morning. He went out to the kitchen. Sora was sitting at the table. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. In front of her were 3 pages covered in writing. She looked up and said that the following had happened overnight. The largest city had rebuilt its port. New types of ships had appeared. 2 small towns had merged into one. On the western continent, construction had begun on something large, presumably a monument or an academy, and more. They had written something in the central city square, in letters that Sora couldn't make out, but which had been laid out specifically to be visible from above. Ethan took the microscope. He focused it. The letters in the square, huge by their standards, each the size of a house, laid out in white stone. He couldn't read their language, but one word was familiar. The third symbol in the line, altered, but recognizable. Lorin. That's what they called themselves. Ethan looked at Sora. She looked at him. He said, "The Lorin people. That's their name." Sora wrote it down in her notebook. The Lorin people. He made coffee, poured 2 cups, set one in front of Sora. She wrapped both hands around the cup and said this was the most important night of her life. Ethan nodded, drank his coffee, went to work. For the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't thinking every second about how his people were dying without him. Because someone was on watch. Someone was keeping an eye out. Someone was taking notes. He was no longer alone. A month had passed. 30 days of real time. Ethan no longer tried to count how many years had passed for the people of Lorin. The number was so vast that his brain refused to accept it. He simply looked through the microscope and saw the result. The people of Lorin had emerged from the Bronze Age. They had passed through the Iron Age. They had moved past something resembling antiquity. And now they stood on the threshold of an era that Ethan mentally named the Renaissance. The cities shone, not metaphorically, they literally shone. Lorin architects had learned to clad buildings with a material that reflected the light of their world's blue sun. Through the microscope, Ethan saw domes and towers and arches and bridges of such complexity that his throat tightened. He was a historian. He had studied human architecture his whole life. But what the Lorins were building was something new, not a copy of Earth's, their own. They had developed philosophers. Ethan saw squares where crowds gathered around figures standing on platforms, debates, public speeches, theaters with tiny stages, and the academy. A building enormous by their standards, on a hill in the center of the oldest city. Sora sketched it in her notebook and said it resembled the Academy of Athens, but with elements found in no earthly tradition. She came every evening, sat down at the microscope, took notes. In a month, she filled 4 notebooks. Each page is an era. Every paragraph was a millennium. She documented everything: wars, peace treaties, the emergence of new arts, religious schisms and reformation, epidemics that the people of Lorin now overcame on their own because they remembered the lessons of the first plague. Ethan read her notes every morning over coffee and felt what an author feels when his characters begin to live a life of their own. Only these weren't characters. They were people. On the 32nd day, something important happened. Ethan sat at the table and looked through the microscope at the academy. A meeting was taking place in one of the halls. Dozens of figures sat in a circle. One stood in the center. Ethan zoomed the microscope in as far as it would go. The figure in the center was holding something in its hands, something flat and white. A sheet. Not parchment, not a clay tablet. A sheet. Paper. They had invented paper. He had told them about paper a month ago. One clue. Plant fibers, water, pressure, drying. And now they had books. Through the microscope, he saw a library attached to the academy. Bookshelves. Tiny bookshelves with tiny books. Ethan stepped away from the microscope and just sat there for a minute. Then he took out his phone and snapped a photo of the library through the eyepiece. The photo came out blurry, but he knew what was captured in it. The first library of the people he had raised. Sora saw the photo that evening and said it needed to be saved, that she would start keeping an archive. Photographs, sketches, diagrams, a timeline. If anything happened to them, someone had to know that the people of Lorin had existed. Ethan looked at her and thought she was right, and that she thought about things he didn't think about. He was a god, she was a chronicler. They both needed help. On the 35th day, the third gift appeared. Ethan found it in the morning on the lid of the box. A quill, tiny, the size of a grain of rice, just like the drop, but not silver, dark, almost black, with a golden tip. Ethan picked it up with tweezers, turned it over, tried to draw a line on the paper. The pen left a thin mark, black ink. Ordinary. He wrote on the piece of paper the first thing that came to mind. My name is Ethan Clark. The letters were clear, nothing unusual. Then he wrote something else. I am 25 years old. The letters faded. He looked closely. They were paler than the first line, significantly paler, almost invisible, because he was 24, not 25. He had lied. And the ink had faded. Ethan stared at the pen. He wrote some more. It's raining outside the window. He looked out the window. The sun. The letters had vanished completely. He wrote again. The sun is shining outside the window. The letters are black, bright, clear. The pen wrote the truth, only the truth. Lies faded and vanished. The more lies, the faster the letters disappeared. Ethan sat for an hour testing the pen. He wrote facts, he wrote fabrications, he wrote half-truths. The half-truths remained visible but faint. Outright lies vanished in seconds. The plain truth shone as if printed. He wrote in his journal, Day 35, the third gift, the pen of truth. The ink is visible only when what is written is the truth. Lies vanish, half-truths fade. The potential applications are endless. That evening, he showed the pen to Sora. She snatched it and began writing so fast that Ethan couldn't keep up. She wrote statements and checked them. The earth is round, clear letters. Water boils at 100 degrees, clear. Ethan Clark is lying to me about something. Ethan flinched. The letters remained on the paper, faded but visible. A half-truth. Sora looked up. She looked at him. She asked what he hadn't told her. Ethan paused. Then he took an envelope out of the drawer. Grandma's. The one the compass had pointed to. He said he'd found it 2 weeks ago and hadn't opened it. Not because he didn't want to, because he was afraid. Sora looked at the envelope. She looked at Ethan. She said she understood, but that the pen doesn't lie. And if it says he's hiding something from her, that means there isn't complete trust between them. And without complete trust, they wouldn't be able to protect the box. Ethan knew she was right. He took the envelope. He looked at his grandmother's handwriting. For Ethan, when he was ready. He wasn't ready. But he had the pen of truth and a woman who demanded honesty. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his grandmother's handwriting, small, neat. He read it aloud. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you found the box, and it means I wasn't wrong about you. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. If you'd known, you would have been afraid, and fear is exactly what they want from you. They are the order of the clockmakers. I'll tell you what I know, but it's not enough. The boxes are real. The peoples inside them are real. The order has been collecting them for centuries, extracting the gifts from them, then erasing civilizations and starting over. I was part of another path. We called ourselves the Guardians of the Garden. There were few of us. Now there may be no one left but you. Your grandfather Raymond was a guardian before me. He cared for the people of Lorin for 20 years. They know him as the first creator. To them, you are the second, the returner. They've been waiting for you. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. Don't trust people who know too much about the old ways. And remember, the box isn't a prison. It's a cradle. When the child grows up, the cradle opens. I love you, Grandma Eleanor. Ethan finished reading and placed the letter on the table. His hands weren't shaking. He had been expecting something like this, ever since the day he found the watchmaker's screwdrivers in the closet, ever since the day he saw the photograph labeled Garden. He knew. He just didn't want to know. Sora was silent. Then she asked what the order of clockmakers was. Ethan replied that he didn't know, not yet anyway. But Grandma had written not to trust people who know too much about old things. It was a warning. Someone was looking for the boxes. Someone was looking for him. They sat in the kitchen until 3 in the morning. They discussed it. They made plans. Sora said they needed more people. Ethan said it was dangerous. Sora replied that the two of them alone against an entire order was even more dangerous. The next morning, Ethan woke up, and the first thing he did was take the pen of truth. He wrote on a blank sheet of paper, Lorin and her people are in danger. The letters were black as night. 6 weeks, 42 days. Ethan had lost 5 kilograms. Not on purpose, he just forgot to eat. Sora started bringing him takeout containers from the cafe. rice and chicken, noodles, soup. He ate mechanically with one hand while flipping through his grandmother's notes with the other. After the letter, he searched the entire house again. He found a hiding place behind the back wall of the closet in the bedroom. A wooden box. Inside were 3 thick notebooks filled with small handwriting. Not his grandmother's, his grandfather's. Raymond Clark, a grandfather he had never met. His grandfather had died in '82. Ethan was born in 2000. But his handwriting was alive, confident, the handwriting of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. His grandfather wrote in English, with bits of Lorin mixed in. He had learned their language. Over 20 years of observation, he had mastered the language of the 3mm people enough to write down their names and terms. Ethan read the notebooks like a detective reads clues. His grandfather described the Lorin people in early stages, the tribes, the first settlements, shamans and chiefs, the first conflicts. He gave advice, just like Ethan, carefully, slowly, not commanding, but guiding. Grandfather wrote. Today he told them about weaving. A week later, they had clothes, not skins, clothes, fabric, colored. They dye it with berries and bark. My God, how clever they are. And further down, Eleanor asked him to be more careful. She senses that someone is searching. She doesn't know who, but she senses it. I moved the box to the basement. Grandpa worked from the basement for 20 years. Eleanor covered for him upstairs. She baked pies for the neighbors. She went to church. She was an ordinary old woman. And in the basement, her husband was building a civilization. Ethan sat on the bedroom floor with Grandpa's notebooks in his hands and thought that his family was crazier than he could have imagined. Grandma baked pies and kept the secret of an ancient order. For 20 years, his grandfather had been talking to people 3mm tall, and now his grandson had found a box under an apple tree and was doing the same thing. Genetics, he thought, or fate. On the 43rd day, Ethan brought the box to Clara at the pharmacy. It was risky, insanely risky, but the compass had been pointing to the pharmacy for 3 days in a row. Every time Ethan took it out, the needle turned in the same direction. Southwest, 3 blocks, Mayfield Pharmacy. Ethan wrapped the box in a towel, put it in his backpack. He arrived 10 minutes before closing. Clara was standing behind the counter, counting the day's takings. She looked up. She saw him. She smiled. She said that if he was there for potassium permanganate, she was out of it. Ethan closed the door. He flipped the closed sign. Clara stopped smiling. She asked what was going on. Ethan set his backpack on the counter. He took out the box. He removed the towel. A blue light flooded the pharmacy. Clara took a step back, then 2. She pressed her back against the medicine shelves, her eyes wide open. Ethan said he needed her help, that he would show her something, and after that she could either help him or forget what she had seen. But he couldn't do this alone anymore. Clara didn't answer. She was looking at the box, at the light, at the tiny world inside. She approached slowly. She leaned in, and Ethan saw her lips tremble. She stood there for so long. 2 minutes, 200 of their years. Then she raised her head. Her eyes were wet. She asked in a quiet voice, "Are they alive?" Ethan nodded. Clara leaned in again. She looked. Then she straightened up. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said, "What do you need?" Her voice was steady, businesslike. A pharmacist, a professional. The shock later, business now. Ethan told her about the diseases. The people of Lorin had defeated epidemics, but not all of them. Through the microscope, he saw how sometimes, in certain cities, things would flare up that he couldn't diagnose. Strange symptoms, the behavior of the sick that didn't fit into any earthly pattern. He needed someone who understood medicine, not a doctor, a pharmacist, someone who knew substances, formulas, reactions. Clara listened. Then she said she needed time. Ethan nodded. He left her the microscope, his address, and left. Clara came to see him 2 days later. with a box in her hands. Inside were herbs, powders, tinctures, and 4 pharmacology reference books. She said she hadn't slept for 2 nights. She'd been thinking. She'd made up her mind. If he wasn't lying and all this was real, then she couldn't just stand behind the counter and sell aspirin. Not when there's a civilization nearby that can be helped. Ethan took the pen of truth and wrote on a piece of paper in front of her. Everything I told Clara Mayfield is true. The letters were black and clear. He showed it to her, explained how the pen worked. Clara looked at the letters, looked at him. She said, "Okay, I'm in." Now there were 3 of them: Ethan, Sora, Clara. On the 45th day, Ethan tried for the first time to give Clara a specific task. He described the symptoms he'd seen through the microscope. People in one of the southern cities were moving strangely, slowly, unsteadily, falling, lying down and not getting up. But it didn't look like an infection. There was no mass outbreak. Isolated cases in different parts of the city. Clara studied his notes. She looked through the microscope herself. She thought for 2 hours. Then she said it looked like poisoning. Not an infection, but a toxin, something in the food or water, but not a common source, otherwise everyone would be sick. Localized. Maybe a specific product, a specific plant. She suggested to Ethan that they tell the people of Lorin to check what the sick had eaten in the last few days, to find a common product, to eliminate it. Ethan leaned toward the box and passed on the advice. 20 minutes of their time, 3,000 years later, Clara saw through the microscope that one of the warehouses on the outskirts of the city had been cordoned off, boarded up, fenced off by a wall. They found it. Whatever it was, they had found the source and isolated it. Clara leaned back in her chair and exhaled. She said that she had just saved the city from poisoning, thanks to a wooden box on the kitchen table. That her father, a 4th-generation pharmacist, wouldn't have believed it. Ethan replied that his grandmother believed it. On the 48th day, the world outside the walls of the house made itself known. Ethan was walking home from school along his usual route, 3 blocks down Main Street, past the diner, past the barber shop, past the antique shop that had been closed for the last 10 years. Only it wasn't closed anymore. The door was open. The sign was new. Hollis and Partners, antiques, appraisals, restoration. Ethan stopped. He read the sign again. A man stood behind the glass in the window, of average height, middle-aged, neat haircut, an expensive jacket. He was looking at Ethan, smiling, not unpleasantly, polite, professional, the way a salesman looks at a customer, or the way a hunter looks at his prey. The man stepped out onto the porch. He extended his hand, introduced himself. Victor Hollis, antiques specialist, had just opened a branch in Willowbrook, a lovely little town. Lots of old houses, lots of attics, lots of things from past centuries. Ethan shook his hand. The hand was dry and firm, a confident grip. Ethan said he was glad to see a new business in town. Victor asked if he happened to have any old things left over from relatives. He buys everything: boxes, clocks, jewelry, especially boxes, especially wooden ones, especially carved ones. The world around Ethan grew quiet. The sounds of the street faded away. He could hear only the beating of his own heart. Victor looked at him with warm hazel eyes and smiled. Ethan smiled back. He said his grandmother had left behind a lot of junk, old books, dishes, but he didn't remember any boxes. Victor nodded. He said that if he found any, he should come by. He paid well. Ethan nodded. He walked home. He didn't look back. He wanted to run. He didn't run. He walked steadily, calmly, all the way home. He closed the door, leaned his back against it, took the compass out of his pocket. The needle pointed back, out onto the street, toward the antique shop, toward Victor Hollis. The compass showed him what he needed most, and what he needed most right now was to know who Victor Hollis was. Ethan took out his phone. He called Sora. He called Clara. He said one word: "Come." The 3 of them sat in the kitchen. The curtains were drawn. The box was on the table. A blue light flickered. Ethan told them about Victor Hollis, about the sign, about the handshake, about how he asked specifically about the boxes, wooden ones, carved. Sora flipped through her notebook. She had already written down everything Grandma Eleanor had written about the Order of Watchmakers. Not enough, far too little. They collect boxes, they extract the gifts, they erase civilizations. But how do they search? How do they find them? What do they do when they find them? Grandma didn't write that down. Clara said they needed to find out more about Hollis, who he is, where he came from, who he works for. An ordinary antique dealer doesn't move to a town with a population of 8,000 just to open a shop. That's not a business decision. It's a hunt. Ethan took out the pen of truth. He wrote on a piece of paper, Victor Hollis came to Willowbrook to look for a box. The letters remained clear, black, not faded, the truth. Sora looked at the letters and said quietly, Well, that's something. Clara asked what they were going to do. Ethan replied that nothing for now. Watch, find out, don't draw attention. The box is in the house. The curtains are closed. No blue light is visible from the street. He checked 10 times. The main thing is not to panic and not to do anything stupid. Ethan spent the next few days living a double life. School in the morning, in the afternoon, watching the box. In the evening, reconnaissance. He started walking past the antique shop every day, just walking by. Sometimes he'd peek through the window. Victor was inside, working, seeing clients. Old ladies brought him watches and candlesticks and porcelain figurines. Victor examined them. He appraised them. He bought some things. He turned others down. He looked like a typical antique dealer, impeccable. On the 52nd day, Sora brought back information. She had run a search on Victor Hollis's name online. She found a little. Licensed antique appraiser. Registered in San Francisco. Kronos Group. Sora dug deeper. Kronos Group. A private firm specializing in the appraisal and acquisition of historical artifacts. Founded in 1987. But Sora had the skills of an anthropologist and the patience of a scholar. She dug into the archives, into old newspapers, into databases, and she found something. Kronos Group had changed its name 3 times. Before 1987, it was called Tempest Industries. Before 1962, Horological Consulting. And before 1938, it had no corporate name, but did have an address. Zurich, Switzerland. The banking district, a building that still stands and is still owned by an anonymous trust. Sora placed the printouts on the table and said that a company that changes its name 4 times but stays in the same place isn't a company. It's a front. Ethan looked at the documents. Watchmakers, he thought. Kronos, Tempest, Horological. All the names are related to time. Clocks, time. They aren't even trying to hide it. On the 55th day, Victor Hollis came to see him himself. Ethan opened the door and saw him on the porch. Suit, tie, smile, a bottle of wine in his hands. He said he was making the rounds of the neighbors, getting to know them. It's a tradition. He asked permission to come in. Ethan let him in. The box was in the cabinet under the sink, wrapped in 3 layers of towels. No blue light was coming through. He'd checked 100 times. Victor walked into the living room, sat down in an armchair, looked around. His eyes moved slowly, intently. He looked at every shelf, every corner, every object. A professional gaze, an appraiser, or a scout. Ethan sat across from him, opened the wine, poured 2 glasses. Victor praised the house, said that the old houses in Willowbrook were real treasures. Wood, stone, handcrafted. Not like a new build. He asked how long the house had been in the family. Ethan replied that his grandmother had bought it in the 50s. Victor raised an eyebrow. The 50s. Interesting. So there might be things from that period here. He asked if Ethan had found anything interesting while sorting through things. Ethan replied that there were old books and dishes. Nothing valuable. Victor nodded. He took a sip of wine. Then he said he wasn't just an antique dealer. He was a collector, and he was looking for one specific type of item, a very rare one. Wooden boxes of a certain age and style. Some of them were several thousand years old. They were priceless. And one such box was believed to be in this part of California, a long time ago. Maybe it's already lost. Maybe not. Ethan looked at him and kept a straight face. 24 years of life, in which the riskiest thing he'd ever done was to fail a physics test, hadn't prepared him for this moment. But 3 months of living as a god had. He had learned to control his voice, his breathing, his facial expression, because every word he spoke in front of the box was law, and he had grown accustomed to weighing every word. Ethan replied that if he found anything like that, he would definitely let him know. Victor smiled, finished his wine, thanked him, stood up, walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold, turned around, said the house was nice, but it smelled strange, something sweet, floral, like an old garden. Ethan replied that there was an apple tree behind the house. Victor nodded, left. Ethan closed the door. He leaned against the wall. His hands were shaking. He knew where the smell was coming from. The box. When the people of Lorin prayed, the light grew brighter and the scent filled the air. Subtle, sweetish, like a blooming garden. He had gotten used to it and stopped noticing. But Victor had noticed. Ethan called Sora and Clara. He told them. Sora said they needed to find a way to block the scent. Clara said she had neutralizers. She'd bring them in the morning. Ethan said that wasn't enough. Victor would come back. He'd keep looking. He was a professional, and sooner or later he'd find it. They needed to think 2 steps ahead. Clara looked at Ethan and said maybe it was time to tell Megan. Ethan asked, why Megan? Clara replied, because if it comes to a fight, none of the 3 of us knows how to fight, and Megan is a former army medic. Megan Reyes sat in Ethan's kitchen and stared into the box. She wasn't crying like Sora. She wasn't turning pale like Clara. She was looking at it the way a bomb disposal expert looks at an unfamiliar device, intently, assessingly, without panic. 3 minutes of silence. Then she looked up and asked, how many of them were there? Ethan replied that he didn't know for sure. Millions. Maybe billions. It depends on how you count. Thousands of generations had come and gone during his observations. Megan nodded. She asked what the threat was. Ethan told her about Victor, about the order, about Grandma's letter. Megan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for another minute. Then she said 3 things. First, the house needs to be secured. The locks are crap. The windows have no bars. The back door opens with a kick. Second, we need an evacuation plan. If Hollis comes with people, we need to know where to run and how. The box is fragile. We can't just grab it and run. We need a container, a soft one, a sturdy one, with straps. Third, she saw Hollis in town. He's not alone. He has at least 2 assistants, a man with a military bearing who stands at the entrance to the shop every morning, and a woman who walks around town taking pictures of houses. Ethan didn't know about the assistants. Neither he nor Sora nor Clara had noticed them. Megan noticed because a former soldier spots military personnel, and she saw how the man by the shop was surveying the street. Not like a security guard, like an observer. Perimeter, vantage points, blind spots, a professional habit that can't be hidden. Ethan asked Megan if she could help. Megan looked at the box, at the tiny cities, at the millions of lives. Then she looked at Ethan. She said that after the army, she thought she would never protect anyone again, because in the war, she hadn't been able to protect someone she cared about, a medic friend, Private Anna Chen. She was killed in an explosion when Megan was just 10 steps away. Since then, Megan hadn't trusted her own hands. The gift Ethan gave her 2 weeks ago changed that. A patch. A tiny scrap of fabric embroidered by the craftswomen of Lorin. Megan carried it in her jacket pocket, and every time she touched it, her hands stopped trembling. Last week, on a call, a child broke his arm in 2 places, a complex fracture. Megan applied a splint in 30 seconds, cleanly, confidently, just like before Anna. She didn't know how the patch worked. She didn't ask, but she knew it worked. Megan looked at Ethan and said, "They gave me my hands back. I'll give them safety back." There were 4 of them now. Over the next week, Megan turned Grandma's house into a fortress, unobtrusively, quietly, professionally. New locks on all the doors, a motion sensor in the backyard, a camera on the porch connected to her phone. They moved the box from the cabinet under the sink to a hiding place behind the wall of the bedroom closet, the very one where Ethan had found Grandpa's notebooks. It turned out Grandpa had set it up specifically for that purpose, a false wall, soundproofing. No smell got through, no light got through. Perfect. Grandpa knew. Ethan thought his family had been ready for this long before he was born. On the 60th day of the 2nd month, Ethan stood in the bathroom, shaving. The radio on the shelf was mumbling the news. The announcer was saying something about thefts from museums. Ethan wasn't listening. Then he heard. The announcer said that over the past year, more than 20 antique items had disappeared from museums and private collections around the world. All wooden, all carved, all dating from 500 to 7,000 years ago. The police suspect an organized ring. Interpol is investigating. Ethan cut himself with the razor. Blood dripped into the sink. He stood there and listened. 20 boxes, maybe more, stolen all over the world, by someone who knows what to look for. The Order of Watchmakers wasn't just watching, it was acting, collecting boxes, en masse, systematically. Ethan wiped the blood from his chin. He stepped out of the bathroom, sat down at the table, picked up the pen of truth, wrote. Victor Hollis is linked to the thefts of the boxes all over the world. The letters remained, clear, black, the truth. Ethan closed his eyes. Then he opened them. He took out the compass. The needle wasn't pointing at his grandmother's letter, not at the pharmacy, not at the box. The needle was pointing south, toward the neighboring town, 20 minutes by car. Ethan didn't know what was there, but the compass knew. He needed something in that direction, or someone. He called Clara and asked her to stay with the box. He took the keys to his grandmother's car, an old Ford. It started on the 3rd try. Ethan drove south. The compass lay on the passenger seat. The needle pointed straight ahead, 20 minutes down the highway. The town was called Elmwood, smaller than Willowbrook, quieter. The compass pointed to the right. Ethan turned, right again, down a narrow street, past houses, past a laundromat, past a small workshop with a sign. The compass trembled. The needle pointed to the workshop. Ethan stopped the car, got out, read the sign. Vaughn Jewelry, handcrafted, restoration, filigree, antique techniques. He pushed the door. A bell tinkled. It was quiet inside. It smelled of metal and rosin. A young woman was sitting at a workbench by the window. Long black hair, slender fingers, a magnifying glass over her eye. She was working on something tiny. She looked up. She looked at him. She said quietly, "How can I help you?" Ethan looked at the compass needle in his pocket. It was pointing at the woman, right at her. He said he needed a frame for a very small object, the size of a grain of rice, very fragile, very valuable. The woman took off her magnifying glass. She looked at him closely. She said she specialized in working with small details. She asked to see the object. Ethan took the silver drop out of his pocket. He placed it on the velvet pad on the counter. The woman leaned in. She put on the magnifying glass. 1 second, 2, 5. She looked up. Her eyes were different. Something had changed in them. She asked where it came from. Ethan replied that it was a gift. From friends. The woman looked at the drop again. Her voice grew even quieter. She said she'd been working with jewelry for 15 years. Since she was 10, her father taught her. She'd seen it all: gold, silver, platinum, handcrafted pieces by artisans from all over the world. But she'd never seen anything like this. It's silver, but not earthly silver. The composition is different, the grain is different. And on the surface, if you look at it magnified 200 times, there's a pattern, not an engraving, the structure of the metal itself, as if it had been grown rather than cast. She looked up at Ethan. "Who are your friends?" Ethan replied. "Little ones." The woman looked at him for a long time. Then she held out her hand. She said her name was Ashley Vaughn, and that if he told her the truth, she was ready to listen. The compass in Ethan's pocket stopped trembling. The needle stood still. He had found what he needed. Ethan brought Ashley to his place 3 days later. Not right away. First, he told her in the workshop, partially, about the box, about the people inside, about time. Ashley listened without interrupting. Her face was expressionless. Her hands lay calmly on the table. Only the fingers of her left hand tapped the wood almost imperceptibly. When he finished, she was silent for a minute. Then she asked one thing. "Do they make things with their hands too?" Ethan nodded. Ashley said, "Good, show me." She stood over the box and looked through the microscope for 20 minutes, longer than anyone else. She didn't look at the cities. She didn't look at the people. She was looking for workshops. She found them on the western outskirts of the oldest city, a row of buildings along the job, smoke from the chimneys. Little figures were working on something at small workbenches. Blacksmiths, foundries, weaving workshops. Ashley looked up from the microscope. There were tears on her cheeks. She said quietly that she'd seen one of them sitting with a tool she couldn't identify, working on a piece of metal. The movements were precise, rhythmic, just like hers, velvet, just like hers. She said that in the modern world, no one appreciates handwork. Machines do it faster and cheaper. Her clients buy filigree, not because they understand how much labor it takes, but because it looks expensive. She felt like the last of a dying breed, a craftsman with nowhere to craft. And down here, in this box, there are millions of craftsmen for whom handwork is the foundation of life, the foundation of civilization, the foundation of everything. Ethan told her they'd already seen her patterns. He'd placed a photo of one of Ashley's pieces in the box a week ago, just to see what would happen. Through the microscope, he saw that the Lorin artisans had begun copying her patterns. Not exactly, with changes, with additions. They took her style and made it their own. Ashley leaned toward the microscope again. She found the workshop. She saw it. A panel hung on the workshop wall, microscopic. The pattern on it was unmistakably hers. Filigree curls, intertwining lines, but with Lorin elements, a new style, born from the meeting of two worlds. Ashley stepped away from the table. She went out onto the porch. She stood there for 5 minutes. She came back. She said she knew what she had to do. She would be the bridge between their craftsmanship and ours. She would create frames for the gifts, wear them, keep them safe, and teach them, through Ethan, what she herself knew. There were now 5 of them: Ethan, Sora, Clara, Megan, Ashley. On the 65th day, Ethan was truly afraid for the first time. Not for himself, for them, for the people of Lorin. He came home from school in the morning and saw that the compass was acting strangely. The needle was twitching. It wasn't pointing in one direction. It was spinning, as if it couldn't decide which way to point, as if it needed to show everything at once. Ethan opened the box. He looked. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The cities were standing, the roads were intact, but something was wrong. He zoomed in on the central square of the oldest city. A crowd, a huge crowd. They stood packed tightly together, not moving. Everyone was looking in one direction, at the Parliament building. The doors were closed. A line of figures stood in front of them, guards. Ethan moved the microscope. The same thing in other cities. Crowds, closed doors, guards. A coup. Someone had seized power in all the cities at once, in a coordinated manner. Ethan sat down and gripped the edge of the table. While he was teaching school children about the Roman Republic, his people had reenacted the fall of the Roman Republic. Dictatorship, tyranny, a military coup, or something like that. He wanted to lean toward the box and shout, "Stop! Restore Parliament! Stop it!" And again he stopped himself. A God who commands creates slaves. He closed his eyes. He thought, for a long time. He opened his eyes. He leaned toward the box. He said quietly and calmly, "Once upon a time, in my world, there was a city called Athens. Its inhabitants created something great. Everyone could speak. Everyone could vote. Everyone mattered. Then people came who decided they were smarter than the rest. They took away the people's voice, and the city grew weaker. Because one person, no matter how smart they are, cannot think for everyone. 1,000 minds are stronger than one, always." He fell silent. He didn't order. He didn't forbid. He told a story, just as his grandmother had told him. Just a story. He went to sleep. He woke up 6 hours later, 36,000 years. He ran to the box. The doors of the parliaments were open. The guards had vanished. The crowds had dispersed. New statues stood in the squares. Ethan couldn't make out the details, but he guessed. Statues of those who had given the people back their voice. Heroes, revolutionaries. Not him. Them. They decided for themselves. He only told the story, and they drew their own conclusions. Over thousands of years, through wars, through suffering, through blood he couldn't see and couldn't stop, but they returned to freedom, on their own. Ethan wrote in his journal, Day 65, political crisis. A coordinated coup in all cities. Did not intervene directly. Told the story of Athens. After 36,000 years, democracy restored by their own efforts. Conclusion. They are stronger than I thought. In the evening, all four arrived. Sora, Clara, Megan, Ashley. Ethan told them about the coup and the restoration. Sora took notes. Clara listened. Megan looked out the window, checking the street. A habit. Ashley sat silently, twirling a piece of wire between her fingers. Then Ashley looked up and said something no one expected. She said that 3 days ago, a man had come to her workshop. Middle-aged, neat, an expensive suit. He asked if anyone had approached her with a request to frame an unusual object. Very small, silver. Ashley said no. The man thanked her and left. She hadn't thought much of it. But now she remembered. The man was Victor Hollis. Silence at the table. The compass in Ethan's pocket twitched. The needle turned toward the door, toward the street, toward the darkness outside the window. Victor knew about Ashley. That meant Victor knew about the drop. That meant Victor knew about Ethan. Maybe not for sure. Maybe he only suspected. But he was narrowing the circle, methodically, professionally, just as befits a man from an organization that has been operating for nearly a century. Megan stood up. She walked to the window. She pulled the curtain aside a centimeter. She looked out onto the street. She turned to the others. She said that there was a car parked across from the house that hadn't been there before. A dark sedan, tinted windows. No one gets out. It just sits there. Ethan looked at the box on the table, at the 4 women around him, at the darkness outside the window, and he realized that the time for observation was over. The time for action had begun. The car had been parked by the house for 3 days. Every morning, Megan checked. A dark sedan, tinted windows, California plates, but Sora ran them through the database and found that the car was registered to Kronos Group. They weren't even trying to hide it. Or maybe they were, but badly. Or maybe they wanted Ethan to know. Pressure, psychological pressure. Show him he's being watched and wait for his nerves to snap. Ethan was nervous but didn't give in. In the kitchen, they worked out a plan. Megan sketched a diagram on paper. Two exits from the house, the front door and the back door. The backyard abuts a fence. Beyond the fence is an alley. Across the alley is Mrs. Chambers' house. 80 years old, deaf, goes to bed at 9. Through her yard, you can get to a parallel street. Evacuation route number 1. Route number 2, the basement. Grandpa Raymond left more than just notebooks in the basement. Megan searched every corner and found a door in the far wall behind a shelf of jam jars. A low door. Bricked up, but the bricks weren't set in mortar. They were just stacked. Behind the door was a tunnel. Narrow. 1 meter by 1 meter. About 30 paces long. It led to a manhole on the neighboring street. Grandpa had dug the tunnel. A long time ago. To escape. Grandpa was prepared for the worst. Grandma knew. They both knew that sooner or later the watchers would come. Ethan stood in the basement, looking at the tunnel and thinking about the grandfather he had never met. Raymond Clark. He dug the tunnel at night. He looked after the people of Lorin in the mornings. He lived an ordinary life during the day. He died in 82. Grandma outlived him by over 40 years. Alone, with a box, without help. Ethan thought that compared to her, he was complaining over nothing. He had 4 allies. She had no one. Megan checked the tunnel. She crawled through it on all fours with a flashlight. She emerged through the manhole, dirty and satisfied. She said the tunnel was holding up. The walls were dry, the ceiling wasn't sagging. It was usable. They just needed to clear the exit and put a new cover on the manhole so it opened from the inside. She did it in 2 days. Now they had 2 escape routes. They moved the box. From its hiding place behind the closet wall to a special container Ashley had made over the weekend. A hard aluminum shell, soft padding inside, straps. You can carry it like a backpack. You can run. The box inside the container didn't budge a millimeter. Ashley said she'd tested it, dropped it from the height of a table, shook it. Everything stayed in place. Ethan thanked her. Ashley replied that the Lorin craftsman deserved the thanks. She had copied the fastening principle from a miniature device she'd seen through a microscope at the Lorin shipyards. They made fasteners for cargo on ships. She scaled it up to human size. The bridge between the worlds worked both ways. On the 70th day, Victor made his move. Not a head-on one, an elegant one. Ethan arrived at work at the school, and Principal Finley called him into his office. He said that a certain Mr. Hollis wanted to sponsor a school project, an open class on the history of antiques, a lecture for high school students, free of charge. Hollis is ready to bring exhibits from his collection. Finley is thrilled. Things like this enhance the school. Ethan said it was a great idea. His voice was even, his smile polite. Inside, he was cold. Victor was integrating into his world, into the school, into the routine. He was becoming part of the landscape, to be closer, to observe. On the 72nd day, Victor gave a lecture. Ethan sat at the back of the classroom and listened. Victor was a brilliant storyteller. He spoke of Mesopotamia, of the first artisans, of the magic that ancient people saw in ordinary objects, caskets, vessels, amulets. He said that some antique objects possess properties that science cannot explain. Not magic, of course, but something close to it, and that his organization was dedicated to finding and preserving such objects, for the good of all. Ethan listened and took in every word. Victor was recruiting, not the students, Ethan, through the students, through public exposure. Look how open I am, how honest, how safe. Trust me. After the lecture, Victor approached Ethan. He asked if he'd liked it. Ethan said it was very interesting. Victor looked him in the eyes and said he sensed a kindred spirit in him, a historian who truly loves the past, a rarity. He suggested they have coffee, discuss shared interests. Maybe a collaboration. Ethan agreed. He needed information. They sat in the cafe, That very one. Sora was working behind the counter and didn't let on that she knew Ethan. Victor talked about his work, travel, auctions, private collections. He was charming, intelligent, well educated. He knew history more deeply than most of the professors Ethan had met at the university. At one point, Victor leaned in closer and lowered his voice. He said there were things the world wasn't ready to know, objects of power, artifacts of ancient civilizations that actually work. His organization protects these objects from falling into the wrong hands. Sometimes that requires doing unpopular things, but the goal is noble. Ethan listened. He didn't argue, he didn't agree, he just listened. Victor watched him, gauged his reaction, tested him. Then Victor said something that made Ethan's mouth go dry. He said he knew a man, a long time ago, back in the 80s, a historian too. He lived in a small town. He, too, loved people more than systems. This man had found something ancient, and refused to hand it over. Victor's organization tried to explain to him that one person couldn't bear such a responsibility, that sooner or later he would break, or others would find him, less polite ones. The man didn't listen, and after a while, he was gone. Victor fell silent. He took a sip of coffee. He looked at Ethan. Ethan was looking at him. Grandfather. Victor was talking about his grandfather, Raymond Clark. He found a box, refused to hand it over, and he was gone. Ethan asked in a calm voice what had happened to that man. Victor replied that he had died, illness, unfortunately, and the object he had found was gone, never found, to this day. Victor set his cup on the table and smiled. Ethan smiled back. Two people smiled at each other across the table, and both knew that the smiles meant nothing. That evening, Ethan sat on the kitchen floor. The box was nearby, a blue light on the walls, quiet singing from the depths. He was thinking. Victor knew his grandfather. Victor knew about the box. Victor knew it was here. Or almost knew. He was playing a game, biding his time, pressuring him, waiting for Ethan to break and hand it over himself. And if he didn't hand it over, Grandpa didn't hand it over, and Grandpa died. Illness, Victor said. Ethan took out the pen of truth. He wrote, Raymond Clark died of illness. The letters were pale, almost invisible, a half-truth, or a lie. Ethan stared at the fading letters for a long time. Then he wrote it again. Raymond Clark was murdered. The letters were black, clear, like a verdict. 3 months, 90 days. The people of Lorin had reached what Ethan called in his diary the early industrial age. Through the microscope, he saw factories, railroads, metal bridges, steam engines on ships, telegraph lines between cities. They were advancing faster than humanity on Earth because they had a creator who told them which way to dig. But they didn't copy Earth exactly. They added their own touches. Their architecture was unlike anything on Earth. Curved towers, spiral bridges, buildings that looked as if they had grown out of the ground rather than been built upon it. Their music, which Ethan sometimes heard from the box like the faintest chime, had changed. It had become more complex, more layered. Their art, which Sora photographed through a microscope every evening, was stunning. Murals on the walls of buildings, sculptures in the squares, and books. Thousands of books in libraries that were popping up like mushrooms in every city. Sora said they were experiencing their golden age. Ethan nodded, but was thinking about something else. He was thinking about Victor. A week had passed since their meeting at the cafe. The car outside the house was gone. Victor hadn't shown up. He hadn't called. He hadn't come to school. Silence. And that silence was more frightening than the surveillance. Because Victor hadn't left. His shop was open. His assistants were in town. Megan had seen them. The man with the military bearing was now walked down different streets. The woman with the camera photographed other houses. They were expanding their search. Or narrowing it. On the 93rd day of Ethan's life, A fifth person appeared whom he hadn't expected. Julia Bennett, 30 years old, an investigative reporter for the local newspaper, the Willowbrook Chronicle. She called him that evening and said she wanted to talk. Not on the phone, in person. Ethan asked what it was about. Julia replied that it was about a man named Victor Hollis and the Kronos Group. They met on a park bench. Julia was tall, thin, dark hair pulled back in a bun, quick eyes, attentive, a notepad in her hands. She said she'd been digging into the story for 6 months. Not here. It started in San Francisco. A series of thefts of antiques from museums and private collections. Wooden objects. Old. Very old. The police couldn't find a connection between the thefts. Different countries, different methods. But Julia did. All the stolen items were described in a single catalog, a private one, unpublished. The catalog belonged to an organization that changed its name every 20 years, but remained in the same building in Zurich. Sora found the same thing, Ethan thought. Julia continued. She traced the catalog back to a person, Victor Hollis. His name appeared in the documents of 5 different auction houses as an appraiser. In every case, the item he appraised disappeared within a year. Julia had tracked him to Willowbrook because Hollis had moved there, and she wanted to know why an internationally renowned antique dealer would open a shop in a town of 8,000 people. Ethan listened and thought. Julia was dangerous. To Victor, to the Order. But also to him, Ethan. A journalist digs. Sooner or later, she'll find the box. Or Victor. Or both. Better to have her on his side than against him. Ethan asked what she wanted from him. Julia said she knew Hollis had been to his house. She knows that Hollis gave a lecture at his school. She knows that Hollis is watching his house. She's not stupid. Ethan has something Hollis wants, and she wants to know what it is. Ethan said nothing. Julia took a folder out of her bag. She tossed it onto his lap. She said it was a gift. Inside were documents. Kronos Group financial reports, employee lists, office addresses, photographs, a map of operations around the world. 23 cities, 23 locations. At each location, an antique item had gone missing, and at each location, a Kronos Group employee had appeared beforehand. Julia had been an investigative journalist for 10 years. For 10 years, she had worked on stories that no one would publish. Every time, someone higher up would shut it down. The editor would say there was no evidence, or it was too dangerous, or the sponsors wouldn't approve. She was tired of being an honest journalist whose stories no one would print, and now she had a lead, a real one, a hot one, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Ethan took the folder. He looked at Julia. He said he'd think about it. He went home. He showed the folder to the team. Sora studied the documents until 3 in the morning. Clara read the names and addresses. Megan marked all 23 locations on the map and said this wasn't a random collection. It was a network, a coordinated operation. Each location was a city with a history, with museums, with antique shops, and with missing wooden objects that matched the description of the boxes. 23 boxes, at least, stolen, taken, exploited. Ethan looked at the map and thought about the people inside those boxes. Billions of beings, sentient, alive, captured, used, squeezed dry of every last drop of faith, and then erased. And again. And again. And again. He leaned toward his box, looked at the cities of Lorin, at their lights, at their life, and said quietly, "I won't let them do this to you. Never." The next day, he met with Julia again, in the park, the same bench. He said he was ready to tell her, but she would have to believe in the impossible. Julia replied that in 10 years of investigations, she had believed in things far more impossible than whatever he was about to say. Ethan told her, "Not everything. Not about the box. Not about the people of Lorin. About the Order. About his grandmother. About the Guardians of the Garden. About how the wooden boxes that Kronos Group steals aren't just antiques. They're more valuable than anything Julia could imagine. And the people who steal them are willing to kill." His grandfather, Raymond Clark, murdered. Julia listened. She took notes. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said one thing. "You have proof." Ethan took out the pen of truth. He handed it to her. He explained how it worked. Julia took the pen with the look of someone being handed a bomb. She wrote in her notebook. "My name is Julia Bennett." Black letters, she wrote. "I am currently in New York." The letters disappeared. She wrote, "Victor Hollis is involved in antique thefts." Black letters. Julia stared at the pen, stared at Ethan, said that this changes everything. Ethan replied, "Exactly." And that she needed to decide whose side she was on. Because there would be no turning back. Julia looked at him, at the pen in her hands, at the notebook with the writing, and she said there had been no turning back from the moment she started digging. There were 6 of them now. 100 days. Ethan stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize himself. Not because he had changed on the outside. He was still a skinny guy with dark circles under his eyes. But something had shifted inside. 3 months ago, he was an unemployed college graduate who ate frozen pizza and felt sorry for himself. Now he was the Guardian. He had people, a team, an enemy, a goal. He no longer felt useless. He felt tired, but needed. That's a huge difference. On the 102nd day, Megan brought her niece Emma to him. 9 years old, slender arms, big eyes, pale skin, a cap on her head because her hair had fallen out after chemotherapy. A tumor. Inoperable. The doctors said 6 months, maybe a year. That wasn't why Megan brought her. She was just picking her up from the hospital and stopped by Ethan's place on business to discuss patrol routes. She hadn't planned anything, but Emma saw a blue light coming from under the bedroom door. Ethan hadn't had time to close it. Emma walked over. She opened the door. She saw the box. She walked over. She leaned in, and she laughed. A quiet, happy laugh, like a child who'd seen a miracle. She said, "Oh, there are little people in here." Megan turned pale. Ethan froze. Emma looked into the box and smiled. Then she turned to Ethan and asked, "Are they real?" Ethan crouched down next to her. He looked into her eyes. He said, "Yes, they're real." Emma asked if she could talk to them. Ethan said she could, but quietly, he added. Emma leaned toward the box and whispered, "Hi, I'm Emma. I have a cat. His name is Marshmallow. He's white and fat." Ethan looked at her and felt his throat tighten. A girl, 9 years old, 6 months to live. And she's talking to civilization in a wooden box on his desk. That evening, after Megan took Emma away, Ethan sat by the box for a long time. Then he leaned over. He spoke. He told the people of Lorin about Emma, not just about her illness, about her, that she loves the color purple, that she has a cat named Marshmallow, that she reads books about dragons, that she laughs when her heels are tickled, that she's 9, and that she doesn't have much time left. He didn't ask for help. He didn't demand it. He told a story, just as he told all his stories, for someone specific, with a name, with details, because he is not a god who moves pieces on a board. He is a man who knows the name of the blacksmith's daughter who has had a fever for 3 days. He went to bed. His sleep was heavy. He woke up at 5 in the morning. He went out to the kitchen. He walked over to the bottle. A vial stood on the lid. tiny, the size of a small pea, a golden liquid inside, the finest engraving on the vial. Ethan took the microscope. He focused it, and his legs buckled. There was a portrait on the vial, a girl's face, in a bonnet, with big eyes. Emma. They had carved her portrait on the vial over the course of their 300 years of work. Next to the vial lay a small plate, microscopic, with text. Ethan focused the microscope on the text, the Lorin language. He couldn't read it all, but he knew enough words to make out the meaning. Creator. We have labored on a cure for Emma Reyes for 11 generations. The finest minds have devoted their lives to this. We love her just as much as you do. Ethan stood in the kitchen, barefoot, in a crumpled t-shirt. He held a pea-sized vial of golden liquid and a portrait of a 9-year-old girl in his palm. And he was crying. Not quietly, out loud, the way he hadn't cried since his grandmother's funeral. He called Megan at 6 in the morning. She arrived 15 minutes later. She saw the vial. She read the translation Ethan had written in his notebook. 11 generations, hundreds of years of their lives. The best scientists, the best doctors. They worked on a cure for a single girl they'd seen for just a second. Because their creator asked them to. No, because their creator told them a story. And they loved the girl from the story just as much as he did. Megan read the translation and her hands were shaking. Then she looked up, and for the first time in 5 years, she cried. She stood in the kitchen, sobbing, clutching the vial to her chest. Ethan came over and she buried her face in his shoulder. They stood like that for 5 minutes. Then Megan pulled away. She wiped her eyes. She said in a businesslike voice that they needed to test the medicine. Clara, the pharmacist, she would know how. Clara arrived an hour later. She examined the vial, the liquid. She carefully placed a drop on a microscope slide. She looked through the microscope. She looked up. She said she didn't understand what she was seeing. The composition didn't resemble any substance found on Earth. The structure of the molecules, if they were even molecules in the conventional sense, didn't fit into the periodic table. This wasn't a medicine as we understand it. It was something else, something that 11 generations of Lorin scientists created specifically for one particular person, for Emma. Clara said she couldn't guarantee its safety. She couldn't conduct clinical trials. She couldn't take responsibility. But if the silver drop purifies water, if the compass shows the truth, if the quill is right, then the people who created these things knew what they were doing. 11 generations. Megan called her sister, Emma's mother. The conversation was long, difficult. Ethan didn't hear the details. Megan went out onto the porch with the phone and talked for half an hour. She came back with red eyes. She said her sister agreed. When they tell you your child has 6 months left, you're willing to try anything. They gave Emma the medicine the next day. 1 drop of golden liquid in a glass of water. Emma drank it. She said it tasted good, like apple juice, but warmer. And she fell asleep on the couch 10 minutes later. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke up, her cheeks were rosy, for the first time in months. Ethan didn't know if it would help. He didn't know if it would cure her. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but Emma's cheeks were rosy. And that was enough for now. 120 days, 4 months. Emma was getting better, slowly but surely. The doctors couldn't explain it. The tumor was shrinking. The test results were improving. Every week, consistently, like clockwork. Emma's mother cried at every appointment. The doctors shook their heads and said that spontaneous remissions do happen. They do. Rarely, but they do. No one knew the truth. Only 6 people, and the people of Lorin. But Ethan had no time to celebrate. Julia was working on an article. The pen of truth had changed her method. She wrote fact after fact, and the pen confirmed each one. Kronos Group, theft, ties to shadow auctions, offshore accounts. Every statement verified by the pen remained in black and white on the page. Every lie her sources had fed her vanished. For the first time in her life, she was writing a piece that could not be disputed, because every word in it was the truth. Literally. On the 125th day, Julia published the article. Not in the Willowbrook Chronicle. Online. On her own website. No middlemen, no editors, no sponsors who could pull the plug. The article was titled The Clockmakers: How an International Network, under the guise of an antique business, has been stealing artifacts around the world for decades. 23 cases. Names, dates, addresses, financial documents, everything. The article went viral overnight. 200,000 views on the first day. 1 million in a week. Journalists from major publications started calling back. The police opened an investigation. Interpol confirmed that the data matched their own. For the first time in 10 years, Julia saw an investigation through to publication. Unedited, uncensored. And the world took notice. Victor responded on the second day. Not with panic, not with flight. A counterattack. Kronos Group issued a statement through their lawyers. Defamation, forgery, an incompetent journalist with a personal grudge, the threat of a lawsuit, pressure on the website's hosting provider, an attempt to block the article. But Julia was ready. The pen of truth didn't just check facts, it created a legally irrefutable foundation. Every fact in the article was the truth. Literally, physically, metaphysically. The Kronos Group's lawyers couldn't find a single mistake because there were no mistakes. But the pressure was mounting. On the 131st day, someone smashed a window at Clara's pharmacy during the night. Nothing was stolen, just a rock through the glass, a warning. On the 132nd day, Sora's car wouldn't start in the morning. The mechanic said someone had cut the brake line. Clean, professional. If she had started the car and driven down the mountain road to college, the brakes would have failed on the descent. Ethan found out and began to shake. Not from fear, from rage. They almost killed Sora, a 23-year-old girl who wanted to study people and record their stories. They almost killed her because she was recording the wrong story. He assembled the team that same evening, all 6 of them. The curtains were drawn. The doors were locked. Megan checked the house for bugs. She found one, under the kitchen table, a microphone. She crushed it with her heel. Ethan looked at his people. Sora's eyes were red from the fear she was trying to hide. Clara was calm on the outside, but her knuckles were white. Megan was composed and tough, with a knife in its sheath on the belt she'd started wearing last week. Ashley was quiet, as always, but her hands weren't shaking. Julia had a tablet on her lap and a list of threats she'd received over the past week. Ethan said there were 2 options. The first, they retreat. He hides the box. Julia takes down the article. They go home and hope the order leaves them alone. Silence. Then Sora said no. Clara said no. Megan said no. Ashley shook her head. Julia just looked at him like he was an idiot. Ethan nodded. Option 2. They press forward. They force Victor to back down. They show him that they aren't just some lone historian who can be intimidated, that there are 6 of them, that they have the gifts, that they have the truth, and that the world has already started listening. Megan said that for the second option, they need to force Victor to reveal himself, pull him out of the shadows, show who he really is, not an antiquarian, not a sponsor of school lectures, a hunter, a thief, possibly a murderer. Julia said one article wasn't enough. We needed the final blow, proof that couldn't be ignored, something that would make the whole world take notice. Ethan looked at the box, at the blue light, at the tiny cities inside, and he made a decision that changed everything. He said he would show the box to the world. No, not to the world, to Victor. He would invite him into the house, to the table, and show it to him, not to surrender, so that Victor would see that the people of Lorin are not slaves, nor a resource, nor a source of gifts, that they are people, alive, intelligent, with history and culture and science and art, and that taking them away would be a crime for which there is no name. Megan said it was madness. Sora said it was madness. Clara said nothing. Ashley said nothing. Julia said that if Ethan showed the box to Victor, and if Julia's camera recorded Victor's reaction, and if Victor said even one word confirming that he knew what it was and that he wanted to take it, then that would be proof. Irrefutable. Public. The end of Kronos Group. The end of the Order of Watchmakers. Or at least the beginning of the end. Ethan looked at Megan. He asked if she could ensure security. Megan replied that she would, or die trying, but she'd prefer the first option. Ethan nodded. He turned toward the box. He leaned down. He said quietly, "I need your help." For the first time, for real, not advice, not a hint, help. Singing rose from the depths. Louder than usual, not a single melody. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of voices, maybe millions. They sang so that the walls of the house hummed, so that the cups on the shelf rang, so that the blue light became so bright it filled the room like dawn. They heard it, and they answered. Winter came to Willowbrook on the 140th day, the first snow, light, quiet. It fell on the roofs and trees and on the old apple tree in the garden under which, 5 months ago, Ethan had found the box. He stood in the backyard and watched the snow, the box in his hands, open. The blue light mingled with the snowy light, and the air around him seemed alive. Inside the box, the people of Lorin were preparing. Ethan had seen it for the past 3 days. Construction in the central square of the oldest city. Something enormous, a structure that grew with every hour of his watching. Sora called it an arch. Clara called it a portal. Ashley called it a bridge. They were all right. The people of Lorin were building the bridge. An artifact that had no place in Earth's history because no civilization on Earth had ever faced such a task. To step out of a world the size of a box into a world the size of a planet. They had been working on it for generations. Ethan had seen the blueprints on the academy walls through a microscope, formulas, diagrams. Entire scientific institutes have been created for a single purpose, the bridge. The Lorinians knew that sooner or later this day would come. Their sacred books spoke of it, books written in the footsteps of the first creator, Raymond. Their grandfather had told them long ago that a time would come when they could go outside. They remembered, passed it down from generation to generation, for millions of years, and they never once doubted it, because the Creator had said so, and the Creator does not lie. Ethan was ready too, or so he thought. He hadn't slept for the past 2 days. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. Sora in the cafe with a notebook, Clara behind the pharmacy counter, Megan with a knife on her belt, Ashley over the den, Julia at her laptop, and them. Billions of tiny people who had entrusted their fate to him, who sang to him every night, who built temples in his honor and carved his eye into the center of their map of the world. He couldn't let them down, not a single one of them. On the morning of the 141st day, he sent Victor Hollis a note, through a boy from school, on paper, old-fashioned, like in another era. The pen of truth wrote every word. Mr. Hollis, I know who you are. You know what I have. Come tonight, 6 o'clock, the backyard of the house at 14 Elm Street. Come alone. I'll show you what you're looking for. And you'll see why you can't take it. Ethan Clark. He read the note 3 times. Every word remained black. Every word was true. He really was going to show it to him, and he really believed that Victor wouldn't be able to take it. He believed it because he believed in them. The preparations took the whole day. Megan laid out the plan. She sketched a diagram of the yard on the kitchen table with a pencil and explained each position as she would explain a military operation. Because for her, It was a military operation. The first one in 4 years since the army. Sora with a camera in the second floor window. The angle of view covered the entire yard. A backup camera on a tripod behind the curtain in the bedroom. 2 angles. If one fails, the second will continue recording. Clara by the back door with a container for the box in case things go wrong. Ashley's container. Aluminum. Padded lining. Straps. 30 seconds and the box is in the backpack. Another 30 and they're in the tunnel. Ashley is in the basement by the tunnel entrance. Flashlight in hand. The door is open. The path is clear. Megan checked it last night. Crawled from start to finish. Dry. Clean. The exit works. The manhole cover opens from the inside with a single motion. Grandpa built it to last. Julia is in a car on the next street with a laptop connected to Sora's camera. Live stream. Recording. Backed up to an external drive. Uploaded to the cloud every 30 seconds. 3 copies on 3 different services. Even if they destroy the camera, smash the laptop, and burn the house, the recording will remain. Julia knew a thing or two about insurance. 10 years of investigations had taught her that the only protection is publicity. What everyone has seen cannot be destroyed. Megan was standing 5 meters away from Ethan, around the corner of the house, invisible from the yard, a flashlight in her left hand, nothing in her right. But Ethan knew she had a knife and a can of pepper spray under her jacket. He had asked her not to bring weapons. She looked at him as if he were a child and said nothing. Ethan stood in the backyard with the box in his hands. It was snowing. Quietly. Beautifully. The flakes swirled in the blue light from the box and seemed not white but silvery, as if the world had decided to give them a backdrop for the final scene. Ethan looked at the apple tree. Old, gnarled, the branches bare. Snow settled on them in white streaks. Under these roots, he had found the box. Under these roots, Grandma had hidden it 20 years ago. Under these roots, Grandpa worked at night, digging a tunnel in the basement while apples bloomed upstairs and the neighbors suspected nothing. 3 generations of Clarks. 3 guardians. Raymond, who began it. Eleanor, who preserved it. Ethan, who continued it. And now, everything would be decided. 10-6. Ethan leaned over the box and looked inside. The bridge stood in the central square, complete. An arch made of a material he couldn't identify. Not stone, not metal, something else, something of its own. Lorin. Thousands of figures stood around the arch, silent, motionless, waiting. Ethan whispered, "I'm ready. You are ready." The figures in the square raised their hands, all of them, at once. The answer, 5-6. The creak of a gate. Ethan straightened up. His heart pounded so hard he could feel his pulse in his throat. Victor entered the courtyard, alone, just as Ethan had asked. A long, dark coat, a gray scarf, hands in his pockets, calm, confident, a smile, that very one, polite, professional. He walked along the snow-covered path unhurriedly, like a man who had come for a business meeting, not for war. He stopped 10 paces away. He looked at the box in Ethan's hands, and his eyes changed. For the first time since they'd known each other, Ethan saw the real Victor. Not a mask, not a role, a man. And in that man's eyes was something Ethan recognized immediately. Hunger, greed, and knowledge. A deep, absolute knowledge of what lay inside that wooden box. Victor had seen the boxes before, many times. He knew their light, their scent, their sound. He knew what was inside. And he wanted it. Victor spoke. His voice was steady, soft, convincing. He said he was glad Ethan had made up his mind, that it was the right decision, that it was a mature move, that the Order was not the enemy, that the Order protects, controls, guides, that without supervision, the boxes are dangerous. The peoples inside them are unpredictable. He had seen it dozens of times in his career, Civilizations that seemed peaceful and advanced had descended into chaos in a single generation. Wars, genocides, environmental catastrophes, nuclear winters in worlds the size of a palm. He personally witnessed how a people in one of the boxes created a weapon that destroyed half their world. Half a saucer scorched to ashes, billions dead, because the guardian of that box fell asleep for a day and didn't manage to intervene. One person cannot bear such responsibility. It requires an organization, resources, centuries of experience. Ethan is 24 years old. How long will he last? A year? 2? 5? Then he'll snap. Then he'll get tired. Then he'll make a mistake, and they'll all perish. His grandfather held out for 20 years and still lost. Ethan listened. Snow fell on his shoulders, and on the lid of the box, and on his hair. It melted on his face. He didn't wipe it away. He listened. Victor spoke, and every word was laced with logic. Every sentence was a brick in the wall of his argument. The wall was strong. Because Victor wasn't entirely wrong. Ethan had seen wars in the box. He saw coups. He saw how the people of Lorin nearly destroyed their own democracy. He saw cities burning while he slept. He saw bodies in the streets. He saw epidemics. He saw famine. Victor knew what he was talking about. He was telling the truth. A partial one, a poisoned one, but the truth. Ethan thought of Para, of the fading letters of half-truths. Victor was a walking half-truth. Everything he said was partly true. And that is precisely why it was so dangerous. Because a lie can be rejected, but a half-truth must be picked apart piece by piece, and the poisoned part must be found within it. Victor fell silent. He waited for an answer. Snow fell between them. 10 steps. A whole world. Ethan looked him in the eyes and spoke. He said that Victor was right. One person cannot. Victor relaxed slightly. Ethan continued. That is why he is not alone. Victor frowned, barely noticeably, a wrinkle between his eyebrows. He asked what that meant. Ethan did not answer. He raised the box, not toward himself, not toward Victor, toward the sky, with both hands, like a priest raising a sacred vessel, like a father lifting a child toward the sun. Snow swirled around them. The blue light grew brighter and brighter and brighter. The light changed. From blue, it turned silver. From soft, it turned dense. It shot vertically upward from the box like a searchlight, like a pillar, like a tree of light. Silver, thick, almost tangible. Snowflakes caught in the beam froze for a moment, as if time were catching them and letting them go. The ground beneath his feet hummed, softly, deeply, like an organ in an empty cathedral, like singing that comes not from the throat but from the earth. Ethan felt the vibration in his feet, in his knees, in his ribs, in his teeth. The house behind him creaked. The windows trembled. Snow fell from the apple tree. Victor took a step back. For the first time ever, his face showed no calculation, no assessment, no polite mask. Fear, real, animalistic. The fear of a man who had worked with the boxes for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. Because the order's boxes were silent. The peoples inside them were broken, intimidated, squeezed dry. They didn't sing. They didn't build bridges. They didn't break out. They served and died and started over. But the people of Lorin sang. The singing rose from the box in such a torrent that Ethan felt it in his skin. Not sound, vibration. Thousands of voices. Hundreds of thousands. Millions. They sang like the ocean crashing against the shore, wave after wave, voice after voice, generation after generation. 2 million years of faith concentrated in a single moment. and a figure emerged from the light. At first, Ethan saw only a silhouette, slender, graceful, feminine. The silhouette emerged from the silvery pillar like a person stepping out of the fog. A step, another. And she stood in the snow. Lirio, Lyra, Silverleaf. Short, slender, silvery hair down to her heels. It lay on the snow and blended with it. Eyes the color of a jewel box, blue, glowing from within, not like a lamp, like the sky at dawn. Pale skin with a slight silvery sheen. Not human, but close, familiar, as if nature had taken a human and slightly rewritten them for another world. A white cloak, embroidered with patterns. Ethan recognized the patterns instantly. Ashley's filigree curls, interwoven with Lorin motifs. Spirals, leaves, stars, waves. Two worlds on a single fabric. The bridge between the worlds was not just the arch in the square. It was in every thread of this cloak. 3 more emerged from the light behind Lyra. Elders, 2 men and a woman, gray-haired, upright, with the faces of people who had lived a long life and did not regret a single moment. They stood barefoot in the snow, and the snow did not melt beneath their feet. And it didn't chill them. They were from another world, a world where time was different and physics was different, and even snow meant something else. The 4 Lorins stood in the light in the backyard of Grandma's house in Willowbrook. Full human height, alive, real, breathing. Ethan looked at Lyra and couldn't breathe. He had known her whole life. She had been a speck under a microscope, an entry in a notebook, a name in a diary, the supreme keeper of the Creator's words, a priestess, a historian, a symbol. But now she stood before him, and she was not a symbol, a woman. With eyes that looked at him the way no one had ever looked at him before. Not with the adoration of a believer toward a god, with something greater, with recognition. She knew every word of his by heart, every piece of advice, every story, every good night, every "I believe in you," every mistake, every apology. She knew him better than anyone on this planet, better than he knew himself, because she had kept his words for millennia. And now she saw the man behind the words, not a god, a man. Tired, frightened, 24 years old, in a crumpled jacket with snow in his hair, with trembling hands, with a box he raised to the sky because he believed in them. Lyra walked up to Ethan, 2 steps through the snow. She stood beside him. She raised her hand and took his. Her palm was warm, alive, real. Her fingers were slender, strong. They squeezed his hand, and Ethan felt a wave run through his body. Not magic, not the gift, just the warmth of another living being. The warmth he had been missing for 5 months. For 5 months he had carried this alone. Yes, Sora and Clara and Megan and Ashley and Julia were there, but he was the one carrying the box. He was the one carrying the voice into the darkness. He was the one making the decisions. He was the one bearing the responsibility for billions of lives. And now, standing right beside him was one of those billions, alive, as tall as he was, holding his hand and carrying it with him. Lyra turned to Victor. He was standing 10 paces away, pale, motionless. His hands were out of his pockets, hanging at his sides. He was looking at the Lorins, and Ethan saw everything he had believed in for 20 years crumble in his eyes. People in boxes don't come out. They don't build bridges. They don't stand full length in the snow and look you in the eye. They are slaves, resources, tools. They exist to serve. That is what the order taught. That is how it has always been. And here stand 4 of them, free, calm, dignified. And one of them opens her mouth and speaks in a language she shouldn't know. In a quiet, calm voice, in the clear English she learned by listening to Ethan whispering into a wooden box on the kitchen table, Lyra spoke. "We are the people of Lorin. We have come, and we thank our Creator. But we no longer need anyone to decide for us." The words fell into the silence of the winter courtyard like stones into water. Ripples spread. Victor heard. Megan around the corner heard. Sora by the camera heard. Clara by the back door heard. Ashley in the basement heard through the open window. Julia in the car heard through the camera's microphone. And the whole world would soon hear. Because the camera was recording. And the recording was streaming to the cloud, every 30 seconds. Victor stood motionless. Snow fell on his shoulders and hair. He looked at Lyra, at the elders, at the light from the box, and he was silent. Ethan could see his brain working, how he was weighing his options, how he was assessing the situation, how he was looking for a way out, and how he couldn't find one, because there was no way out. The people of Lorin had come out. They were standing here, alive, real, on camera. And no power in the world could drive them back. Because back didn't mean into the box. Back meant into slavery. And slaves who have stood on their own 2 feet do not become slaves again. Victor took a step back, slowly, like a man retreating from the edge of a cliff. And another. And another. He didn't take his eyes off Lyra. She looked at him calmly, without hatred, without anger, without triumph, with something resembling sympathy. Because she knew the history of Earth's people, Ethan had told her, and she knew that Victor was human too, confused, frightened, convinced of his own righteousness, like all tyrants of all ages. Victor stopped, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, said quietly that it was impossible. No people had ever stepped out of the box in the entire history of the Order. Never. Lyra replied that it was because the Order wouldn't allow it. Victor said nothing. Then he turned. He walked toward the gate, slowly, without looking back. His back straight. His step was steady. But Ethan saw his right hand trembling, barely noticeable. The man behind the mask was broken. His 3 assistants were waiting behind the fence, a man with a military bearing, a woman with a camera, and another whom Ethan hadn't seen before. Victor walked past them. He said nothing. They exchanged glances and followed him. The car started. The headlights flashed. It drove off. The red taillights faded into the snowy darkness. Silence. Snow. Blue and silver light. The singing had subsided. It hadn't disappeared. It had grown quiet. Background noise, like the breathing of a sleeping child. Calm. Peaceful. Megan emerged from around the corner of the house, hands in her pockets. Her face was inscrutable. She looked at the Lorins, at Lyra, at the elders. She nodded, briefly, in a military manner, as an equal among equals. Clara came down the porch steps, a container in her hands. It wasn't needed. She set it on the step and stepped closer. She looked at Lyra and smiled. Warmth, like a pharmacist's smile when a patient recovers. Ashley stepped out of the door, quietly, almost inaudibly. She saw Lyra's cloak and stopped. Patterns, her patterns, on the cloak of a woman from another world. Ashley stood and watched, and tears streamed down her cheeks silently. Her craft had not been in vain. Her hands had created beauty that had crossed the boundary between worlds. She was not the last of her kind. She was the first of a new one. On the second floor, Sora lowered the camera. She stepped away from the window, pressed her back against the wall, slid to the floor, sat and breathed, a notebook in her hands, open to a page. She hadn't written a single word. For the first time in 5 months, she didn't need to write it down, because she would remember this without notes, for the rest of her life. In a car on the next street, Julia was looking at her laptop screen. The recording was playing. The quality was good. The sound was clear. Every word Lyra had spoken was recorded. Every frame, the snow, the light, the faces. Julia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She checked the cloud. 3 copies. All uploaded. All saved. She closed the laptop lid, leaned back in her seat, looked at the car's ceiling. 10 years. 10 years of work. 10 years of investigations that no one published. 10 years of honesty that no one needed. And now she held in her hands a story that would change the world. Not an article, a story, a real one, a living one, with silver hair and eyes the color of dawn. She placed her finger on the publish button, hesitated for a second, pressed it. The video went out into the world. In the backyard, Ethan saw none of this. He was looking at Lyra. She was standing next to him, holding his hand. Snowflakes were falling on her silver hair and not melting. The elders stood behind her, silent, calm, like trees that have survived 1,000 winters and know they will survive another 1,000. Lyra looked at Ethan, from the bottom up. She was half a head shorter than him, small, fragile in appearance. But behind that fragility stood millions of years of a civilization that had learned not to break. She spoke quietly so that only he could hear. "Hello, I've come to you." Her voice was just as he had heard it from the box, thin, melodic, with an intonation that exists in no earthly language. But now this voice didn't sound like a mosquito's squeak coming from a box. It sounded like the voice of a living woman standing next to him in the snow. Ethan looked at her silver hair dusted with snowflakes, at eyes the color of the world he had kept for 5 months, at the hand resting in his, at the cloak patterned with 2 worlds, at the woman who had been a dot to him and had become a person, who had been a priestess and had become Lyra, who had waited for him for 2 million years of their time and had waited in vain. And for the first time in all that time, he exhaled, truly, with all his might, like a man who had carried a mountain on his shoulders and finally set it down on the ground. Not because he had given up, not because he was tired, because the mountain had learned to stand on its own. He squeezed Lyra's hand. She squeezed his hand in return, and smiled. The first smile from another world on this earth. Snow was falling. Clara stood on the path and smiled warmly and calmly. Sora was coming down the stairs with teary eyes and a notebook pressed to her chest. Megan stood with her arms crossed and nodded slowly as if talking to herself. Yes, right. That's how it should be. Ashley looked at the patterns on Lyra's cloak and wept silently. But these were the tears of a master who had seen her work completed. Somewhere around the corner on the next street, Julia sat in her car and watched the numbers on her phone screen as the view count rose. 1,000, 5,000, 10, 20. The world was watching. The world was seeing. The world was changing. Ethan stood in the backyard of his grandmother's house. Surrounding him were the people he loved. Standing next to him was the woman from the wooden box. She was no longer a dot, a symbol, or a priestess. She was Lyra. Just Lyra. The compass lay in his pocket. Ethan took it out. He looked at the needle. The needle wasn't moving, for the first time in 5 months. From that very first day when the compass fell into his hands, the needle had always pointed somewhere. There had always been something more urgent. There had always been something further away. There had always been somewhere to go. But now the needle stood still, because everything he needed was right here, right now. in this yard, in this snow, in these hands. Ethan put the compass away. He looked at the apple tree in the corner of the garden, bare branches in the snow. It all began beneath it. Grandma knew. She hid the box and waited. Grandpa knew. He dug a tunnel and taught the people and waited. They both knew that one day their grandson would stand here, with the people they had raised, with the people he had found, with the woman who stepped out of the light, and with a future that was just beginning. Because this wasn't the end. 23 boxes scattered across the world. 23 peoples held captive. The order was weakened but not destroyed. Victor had left but hadn't vanished. The world had seen the video but hadn't yet understood what it was seeing. It was all just beginning. But right now, at this very moment, in this snow, Ethan allowed himself not to think about tomorrow. He looked at Lyra. She looked at him. And he spoke softly into the silence of the winter evening. "Thank you, Grandma. I didn't screw it up." Lyra smiled. One of the elders behind her tilted her head. Megan snorted. Sora laughed through her tears. Clara shook her head. Ashley wiped her cheeks with her palm. The snow was falling. The light flickered, silver and blue. And somewhere inside the box, which was no longer a prison, but had become a cradle that had opened, they sang. Quietly, gratefully, freely. The way they sing when a father returns from war. The way they sing when they know they haven't been abandoned. The way they sing when they no longer have to wait.